So I think we should get started. So Steve, I don't know if you want to hit the old record button. There we go.
We are recording.
Perfect. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to a special school board meeting tonight, which is August the 11th, and it's 5:30. And so with us tonight from the school board is Rob Nadeau, Norm Gupel, Andrea Folsom, Jim O'Brien, and I believe Seth Aframe is joining us, but likely only via audio today. Because of the timing of this, he wasn't able to join us in person. And then we have members of the leadership team. So Superintendent Chamberlain, Michelle Clark, Bill Carosa, Matt Stone, Mandy Hibbard, and Amy Doyle. Thank you for joining us this evening. So let's first start. Steve, I saw you had some flags, so we can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So because this is a officially noticed school board meeting, I just want to state for the record that we are meeting completely virtually this evening. We can do this because of the governor's emergency declaration and emergency orders that waive certain provisions of New Hampshire's RSA 91A, which is our open meeting guidelines. Some provisions of RSA 91A have been waived by the governor's emergency orders, specifically allowing boards, public bodies like the Hopkinton School Board, to be able to meet to conduct our business without being in a physical location or 100% virtual. And so we provide for the public abilities to listen in or engage with the board meeting. So we are broadcasting this meeting on Zoom. There is also a call-in option, and then we're also broadcasting over YouTube. And so there's many ways for members of the public to engage and to listen into this conversation. It's also being recorded, and that recording will be posted up on the website. All other provisions of RSA 91A will be followed, including minutes of the meeting. So I just want to thank everybody. This is an additional meeting of the Hopkinton School Board, and so I just want to thank everybody, both board members and leadership team members, as well as members of the public, taking part in this meeting. And so I thought I would take a few minutes and just talk about why we're here. That's probably a good first step for what we hope to accomplish tonight. So as most people know, and I'm assuming if you're attending this meeting or listening in, you probably are aware that we've had a task force led by the superintendent meeting over the past month or more, looking at back to school options and planning for the district. On Thursday, August 6th, the superintendent brought forward a proposal that the board heard, that members of the community got to see. There's some questions asked, some public comments stated. And the board during that meeting really felt that because of the complexity of the issue and because of all the interest in this topic, that having a separate meeting outside of our normal school board meetings was appropriate and needed in order to dive in a little more deeply to understand all the planning, all the, I guess, all the inputs that have gone into the work of the task force and into the proposal. It really needed to have its own separate time in order to dig in deeper. And so that's why we're here tonight. Really, for me, the goal for tonight is to listen, to learn, and to really understand better the many issues associated with going back to school, really so that the board can make an informed decision, working with the leadership team and with the superintendent on a path forward for the district. So that's the purpose of the meeting tonight, is really to dig in more on the work of the task force and the proposal that was put forward. So So I want to talk just for a minute about process and about the public process that we're currently engaged in. I think, as everybody knows, or if you don't, we're going to talk about it. The school board as a public body meets only in public. And so our meetings, our deliberations, our votes, the information presented to the board is all done in public. There are some provisions of state statute that allows the board to go into what's called a non-public session, but those are very specific for very specific circumstances. And what that really means is for the board like ours is that the only time that board members are allowed to and really do deliberate on issues and make decisions and collaborate with each other is when we're in public meetings like this one. And so on Thursday, when the proposal was presented for the board, that was the first time, along with the community, that we saw that proposal. And so again, setting up these times to have these conversations are important. And I just want everybody to know that this is, I guess, the second time that the board has come together in order to share, to have discussions, to learn more. And so public processes by design are sometimes a little bit messy. And they're sometimes confusing, and they're often frustrating, especially as an outside observer looking in, trying to understand the process that's taking place and why it's sort of happening in real time in front of us. And so, I think for this board, and I think for all boards, a key piece of sort of these types of processes are public input. We normally start with a proposal or start with an idea. And then we ask for public input in order to inform the deliberations, in order to hear from the public how that proposal either works, doesn't work, comments, concerns, questions. And then that helps inform the board to make good decisions, or we hope to make good decisions. And so the public comment, the public input component is really important, I think, to a good public process. And so, on Thursday when we met, we wanted to set this meeting up as a Q&A session. And we asked for the public to provide us with questions, comments for how they felt about the proposal that came forward, thoughts that they might have. And I would say in terms of engaging the community and hearing from the public, that was a complete success. I would say since Thursday, I didn't keep count, but I would say that the board has received 100 or more emails where people are sharing their concerns, they're sharing their thoughts, they're sharing their personal stories, they're sharing their impact for how this impacts their lives and their families. Some of it is deeply personal. And I just want to thank everybody for providing input and for providing those public comments. I know that all the board and the leadership team and the superintendent read these comments that are put forward. I know we try to either individually or collectively respond when we can to questions that are come forward. They are very meaningful and they are read. I know, like last night, I was up late reading comments that came forward, and I was up early this morning preparing for this meeting, trying to take a lot of the questions that we received into consideration. So again, I just want to thank everybody and tell you that these comments and this input is really meaningful to our process and very meaningful, especially to this process. And so what do we hope to do tonight? So I thought a lot and talked to my colleagues about how to structure this type of conversation. And I think where we land and what we're going to try to do tonight is we received, as I said, hundreds of emails, and we probably received hundreds of questions contained in those emails. Kind of all, I would say, spanning everything that I think we could think of, all really legitimate questions. So our hope is tonight is to try to answer as many as we can. I don't believe it's feasible for us to answer every question that came forward in every way, but we've tried to group them and we've tried to come up with what are the larger buckets of questions that we can dive into to better understand the context of the proposal and sort of where we are as a district as we forge a path forward. And so I'm gonna try to facilitate and rely on my colleagues to also facilitate. We've organized those questions so we have access to them as we go through. But we really want this to be a conversation. But I don't want us to do is just keep peppering the superintendent and his leadership team with questions. What we really want to do is this to be a conversation and really, again, dig into the nuance that went behind the proposal and sort of where we are coming from. So that's sort of the format for tonight. I think it's going to be the board asking a lot of questions that have come in from the community that's been informed by the community. There is for tonight at the bottom of, if you're an attendee, it'll be at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A feature. As we go along, I invite anybody to type questions into that Q&A feature, and we're going to try to monitor that. To pull questions as they come in, if they're relevant or if they're coming up, and how we can address them. If we can't address them, it's good to have them in that feature, because then we can capture them and ensure that the board has them and that the leadership team has them. So we're continuing to assess where we're at and where the community has questions for our proposal. So for tonight, please try to take advantage of that Q&A. Those questions will come, I think, to the panelists who will see those questions, and we can respond accordingly. So where do we go from tonight? So tonight, again, tonight's not a decision-making meeting. Tonight's really a meeting to dig in and learn. We have a regular school board meeting, which is scheduled for Thursday, starting at 5:30. That agenda for that meeting will probably have more than 2 agenda topics, but the 2 main agenda topics are, one, for the board to set what's going to be voted on Saturday. So hint, please go vote on Saturday. That's a little commercial break for voting on Saturday for the school budget. And then the second item is going to be continued deliberation and discussion on the path forward. So taking tonight into consideration, I think the board will listen intently and will over the next couple of days are going to think a lot about where we are and paths forward. And then on Thursday, I think the board will deliberate and hopefully, fingers crossed, but hopefully find a path forward and working with the leadership team and the superintendent for where we want to see a final proposal come down for back to school. So that's sort of the process moving forward. And I guess before I sort of I think ask my colleagues if they have something they want to jump in and say while I have the floor. I don't want to give it up just yet. I do want to just sort of say a few things that are on my mind as we sort of enter into this, for us to sort of think about, and for everybody to sort of contemplate as we listen to sort of the discussion over the next few hours. And so say a few things. So the first one is, it kind of goes without saying, but it's helpful to keep reminding myself that, we are in the midst of a public health crisis, a public health emergency. And when I think about, what does a back to school plan look like as we're in the middle of a public health crisis and a public health emergency? I know we cannot replicate and we can't replace the education experience that our children and our faculty had pre-COVID. And I know that sort of goes without saying, but I just wanted to say it because it's real. We can't magically wave a wand and go back to early February of 2020. That the plan that comes forward and whatever back to school looks like is going to be different. The educational experience is going to be different. New Hampshire has, I think, over nationally, we have low instances of COVID. In Merrimack County, we have low instances of COVID, and in Hopkinton, we have low instances of COVID. And a lot of that is due because we've done the right things. We've taken the right precautions. And so anyway, a plan going forward, I think, has to take all that into consideration. And then for me, anyway, I think because of the state that we find ourselves in, I think what we all would consider the best or optimal education outcome may be harder to attain in a plan that we put together under the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And that's not because that our teachers or our staff or the school board doesn't want to achieve those high educational outcomes or the same standards that we've met or the expectations that we have. It's because the world we live in has changed. And so we have to make choices. And we're going to have to manage those choices, taking into consideration the third facet of what I want to say, which is a lot of what we're doing here today and the choices the board and the administration is going to make really come down to how we manage risk. This is a risk management really exercise. We can mitigate risk. We can try to manage the risk to keep it as low as we possibly can. But at the end of the day, there's risks associated with back to school and what we do. And so for us as a community and as a school board, our job is to manage risk. And I think that's what's expected of us. We do this all the time, both in our professional and personal lives. But the stakes are really high here. And we're talking about the lives of students, the lives of our staff, and the lives of our people in our community. But this is a risk management and mitigation decision. And each of us are entering this, each of us here as a panelist on this call. And I think each of us across the community are managing this risk, and we all have different levels of risk tolerance. And I think part of our job is to figure out what the right path forward and the right amount of risk as a district that we're each willing to take on and to find, again, a workable path moving forward. Any plan that we come forward with as we move forward will require adaptive management. Circumstances are going to change. They've changed from February to early in this pandemic. They certainly changed over the course of the spring. And I think we can all assume that come the fall, the circumstances both here in Hopkinton, across the state, and the nation are going to change. We don't really know which way they're going to change. None of us have crystal balls. But we can be sure that we're going to, as a district, we're going to have to adaptively manage whatever proposal and plan we move forward with in order to achieve the best educational outcomes that we can get for our children. And so I've been thinking about adaptive management and what that means for an institution our size and for the community that we serve, how we plan for that type of change. And then, really the last thing, and then I promise I'll be quiet, is, this also, it's a risk management decision, but there's also a real consideration around the resources that we have. The Hopkinton School District doesn't have unlimited resources. The community of Hopkinton doesn't have unlimited resources. And so as we consider our risk management approach, as we consider the need to adaptive manage, both leading into school and over the course of the school year, we also need to take into consideration what are the resources available to us as a school district, both financial resources, those are the ones that immediately come to mind. But we also have human resources and our staffing resources. And so, and I would even say our parental and community resources. And so again, our resources aren't unlimited. And I think as we think about a plan that's going to be workable, we have to really take into consideration what's available to us to be able to draw from as we move forward. So enough from me. That's sort of my my opening soliloquy, and I apologize for being so long, but I thought those were important to state. And so I guess at this point, before we sort of hop into the meat of the sort of the Q&A and discussion, I just wanted to invite any other board member who wishes to sort of, I don't know what they wish to say, but if they wish to say sort of anything in sort of the opening about what you're thinking as we go into this conversation, I would invite that now. And I started that Norm has raised his hand already, so he's ready to jump in. Thank you, Norm.
Jim, thanks for the great introduction, explaining how we got here. I think, one thing I don't want to be too long. One thing I wanted to stress tonight is that, we're going to have a lot of people talk tonight. We're going to share a lot of questions and a lot of answers. And, when we're talking about our taxpayers, our students, and our community, we're very emotional. We're going through a public health crisis, and that's something we all understand. But one thing I want to really ask the community, ask this board, ask everyone here is to remain respectful. I think that's something that's very important, that when we are addressing our concerns, we understand that, we're all trying to do the best we can. This group has worked many hours in order to get where we are right now. And on their off days, during their time, to really try and come up with a plan. And Steve brought it forth to the board. It's important that Jim is correct. That was the first time this board has seen that proposal. And for us, we have to decide what's best moving forward. And that's subject to change. Possibly, we do not know. But I just, for me as a board member, it's really important that we're in this together. We have been. And, regardless if you have students in the school system or, you really want to be able to see what's best for everyone. So I just wanted to kind of say, please remain respectful. I want to get through this and listen to your concerns. And I really want to say thank you to everyone who has sent emails and questions. I have read them all. I think that they've all been great points, all the presentations. And I thank you all for taking that time and for being here to get through this. Thank you, Jim.
I was talking to myself and not to you guys. Thanks, Norm. Andrew, I saw you have your hands raised. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate a point that we made, just since I'm seeing a few hands going up in the participants list. So if you do have questions, if you can pop them into the Q&A down below, we have about 22 pages worth of comments that we're going to be cruising through. We're not going to get through all of them, and we're going to have a really limited time at the very end for additional questions that we don't hit. So if you could pop your questions into the Q&A, that would be great. That way we can read them and hopefully address them. But I'm ready to dive right in.
I did it again. Thanks, Andrea. Rob, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, super quick. I talked to a colleague who teaches in another school district today. We're talking about their plans versus our plans as I was exploring the different plans in various districts in the region. And one of the things that he reminded me of is, the greatest asset in education is that teacher-student relationship. And that happens best when kids are in the classroom. So I noticed there's a broad question in the Q&A is the board open to a change in what was a draft on Thursday? I will speak for myself in that, still learning the process. The goal is to make that happen for kids as long as we can do it safely for them and for teachers. And hopefully as we move through this, we'll find a path to make something happen that's respectful of everybody and safe and best for kids so they can get back with teachers. That's all.
Thanks, Rob. So as I sort of said at the onset, I think Andrea said we have 22 pages of questions or comments that have been put forward, which is a lot. And so what I think we're going to try to do is take turns as best we can between some of the board members asking sort of questions and continuing the conversation. So again, it's a conversation, not a series of one-off questions. And so I'll start and really ask, I think, Steve to just maybe start from the beginning and walk us through, we've been referring to a task force that has been meeting and has helped inform the proposal that came forward on Thursday. So I'm just wondering if you could just, walk us through that task force process, what it was, who was on it, and then how sort of was it structured, and the types of issues that task force sort of looked into, if you don't mind to start there.
Sure. Just to bring us back a little bit, in June, we were still working on the budget. The board didn't adopt the budget that's going through Saturday until July 2nd. So we were the only school district in New Hampshire. So in full transparency, as some districts were digging in on back to school, we were still developing budgets because our previous budgets failed May 30th. So we spent a lot of time in June. Our first task force meeting was set for June 30. It was right about the time that the state guidelines came out. And so we felt we were well situated to review the guidelines as a task force. The month of June, while we were working on the budget, the leadership team discussed the formation of the task force, what kind of structure would it be. We had a procurement and operations sect. We had a communication sector. We had a medical sector with our nurses. We had a social emotional with school counselors. We had 3 school design teams working, subcommittees working. We had student services. And certainly if I missed any of the groups, we can certainly, people can jump in. So we met on June 30. We outlined with some, at that stage, we looked at some started planning with some truisms. We felt it was, we were going to plan for a situation where some students would not be able to return for medical reasons and some staff would not be able to return for medical reasons. So we accepted that as a truism when we began planning. The first stage, as if people remember, we spent some time putting together a survey. What, in general, what kind of interest was there in coming back to school? What kind of, what were people comfortable with masks and social distancing and where to eat lunch? And so we tried to look at that. At the same time, when the state frameworks came out, I asked the administration just take a look at under the guidelines how many students could we fit in the class. Let's start there. After a lot of measuring and a lot of discussions, they looked, and we were about, like many schools, found themselves with about 50%. So we started working on a survey, and we started working on a 50%. We spent a whole meeting as we're planning what kind of questions that we need to answer in this process. And I think we probably had a couple hundred questions by subcommittee that we spent time discussing. Norm was the school board rep on it and a great contributor. All the administrators were either co-chairs. We co-chaired each subcommittee. So we met every week starting June 30, and then there were subcommittees that met before. Actually, one of the first activities was to share try to curation documents. So we had a lot of documents presented, including other state plans, articles that people found, podcasts that people listened to about what school could look like. And so we curated those documents, provided, and we had, I thought, significant discussion and a quality discussion every time. So we met every week from June 30. And pretty rapidly, we got into the notion of a 50% hybrid. I think most of the time was spent developing a hybrid plan. What would that look like in the school design teams? How do we support that with procurement? What would be the medical procedures that we would have to go? And then I felt pretty good. I felt, based on where the colleagues I was at and districts where we were at, I felt, we had some good momentum going for a hybrid type project, a program schedule. And then just a couple of things happened. We got further advice, something basic and something simple. But one of the things that started concerning me to our ability, if we're in a hybrid plan at 50%, every educational space is used in our schools. Has small groups in those schools, but every classroom is full, every area is full. And one of the first things that had me concerned, because of my experience, as some people may not know, I was in the high school for 10 years. And was the prohibition on fans. And in August and September, fans are a significant part of our middle school, to be honest with you, the fourth and fifth floor. I go back a long time. And so how would we, and some of the comments from teachers started coming concerned about how do you create an environment in masks. We went pretty early to masks. We went pretty early to social distancing, but how do you create an environment with that kind of heat and mask? And so that was my first. Well, we probably couldn't use every space if we're in a hybrid, so that was a concern. And then other concerns, if we're using every space, then we have to clean every space, and we have 50% of our kids in every space. And there is some concern about our custodial staff who struggled at the onset of COVID and their ability to work. And during all this time, Bill and his team presented a unique, a little bit different approach, was a AM/PM program, literacy, numeracy instruction every day. At the end of the remote learning piece, we had a curriculum council meeting with administrators and teachers, and I tried to get some feedback on what they felt the academic progress was. And that was a big unknown for a lot of our teachers. They weren't sure, especially early elementary, documented academic progress. So in person every day on for literacy and numeracy made good sense. It came from the team. So how do you manage that with midday bus runs and all that piece and the cleaning that would require for all that? In the meantime, I was concerned about space at the high school. And then we did have, we did have some staffing concerns. How are we going to handle if there are staff who are immunocompromised, who are qualified through ADA for accommodations? So that came through, and that made me take a look again, and the staff again. So all that put together and trying to really focus on what we felt was one of the biggest concerns about remote learning was our early elementary approach. We came together with, and I do feel, I mean, there's been a lot of comments. The data and the numbers, by presenting a plan, there would be students in our school every day in all our schools. I do believe it's safer to have kids in our schools. It says, how many kids can we accommodate dependably, consistently, and for planning purposes? And I think that was one of the pieces that actually came from a workshop with our property liability, a carrier. And they said, one of the things, what you promise the community, you want to deliver your community. And so that was in the back of my mind. What can we do? And so that work with the task force, and after lots of discussions and lots of peace, I felt to have consistently, dependably, continually about 25% of our student population in 4 through 12, and our population at preschool through 3, 50% at a time, and felt we could manage that consistently, dependably. And so that's what ended up being presented. So it is, I do believe that kids can be in safely, and clearly from the incredible amount of feedback, and I too appreciate the feedback, perhaps my summation or summary, and absolutely 100% willing to look at enlarging that number from 25% of our population to higher. And to go back to, we spent about an hour and 45 minutes a day with leadership teams starting to unpack once again what a hybrid would look like with about a 50% population in our schools versus what I was imagining a 25%. And so that's how we got here. It's the logistic component of, and I guess maybe this is what hurts me. I was a building principal walking into a school in the morning, making sure that everybody's had their self-assessment and making sure, we have a couple of teachers absent. How do we do that? So we have an IA who really is the person governing a remote learning room absent. How do we do that? I've got to get everything cleaned. Well, the fans, we can't use this room. The logistics of clear, consistent planning, it moved me to less than a 50%. We have additional space, we have additional time, we have less management to put that in. But clearly by the feedback, the community is willing to try and to move forward in a less dependable, less consistent approach to get at what Rob talked about, getting those kids in class with teachers on a consistent basis. Perfectly appropriate. I get it. I was trying to, put forward, but yes, I think we can move and we can try, and our administrators care deeply. They have heard the feedback. The first person on the Zoom call today says, we can do this, we can make this happen. So there's still a positive piece here. But I guess it's just going more than the 25% that I was envisioning up to a more traditional 50% hybrid and start planning that way.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll ask the next question, and then I do invite others to hop in, which is, it's a question that I've heard asked a number of times. And, we did a survey, the district sent out a survey to parents. And so I'm just curious, how are the results of that survey used to help inform you? I mean, that's probably the most basic way to ask the question. So.
Sure. We knew from the survey, we knew that parents and teachers were ready to come back. We knew, and in full transparency, Bill and I talked about this. We knew that the AM/PM at the Harold Martin School was the least popular on the survey, but also that survey came without the educational pedagogical background to say the why and the piece of that. So we felt that the academic growth of everyday literacy and numeracy, with the ability to plan for the off session using local resources, may win the day on that piece. So we knew we had people willing to do it. We knew we had an opportunity to do it, but then the logistic components came in, and I wanted to look the board in the eye and deliver something that could be consistently, dependably delivered. That to me was a significant factor, and based on that, I went too conservative, and I get that, but it was in response to sometimes panic and sometimes puzzlement and sometimes disquietness on how we run schools in a pandemic. We have 27 subs on our list. We called only 4 are willing to come to, into this environment now. So trying to run a schools with a reduced substitute is an issue. So that's the mechanics and the logistics of running. It's not if we could assure health and everybody, we're fine. It's the variance of our expectation that requires the management that makes this so complicated and so variable. There's a lot of variables that come in every day when you're managing a school, when you're managing a class. And so I was trying to squeeze out some of those variables, but we'll plan with those variables in, and this community will rise and support, and we'll figure it out. But we did use the survey, but then the logistics and some of the changes, the nurses had a meeting with Dr. Chan, and they said at any symptom, we have to isolate. Well, that wasn't even part of the school return plans. That was even after. At one point, it was the guidance was to gown after every student. That was a piece. Staff members at one point before school started, if you went out of New England, you were quarantining for 2 weeks. So if teachers left New England, they were quarantining for 2 weeks. How do you manage a school if you have 3 teachers take their youngsters to college outside of New England, they come back and they have to quarantine for 2 weeks if we're not remote? We can't find subs for those teachers. That's the implication piece. And that's why there was a variance from the survey, because when we started implementation phase and design phase, the design phase, it became very complex. But that doesn't mean we can't address that. It doesn't mean we can't try to beat that and plan and increase that 25%, 50%, or whatever the board wants us to look at. Whatever this board's comfortable with, we will plan under the direction of, as I always say, I serve at the pleasure of the Hopkins School Board. Whatever this board wants to give us the charge to plan. I did feel, though, that I presented a plan that would have kids in every building and something we could manage.
So I'm going to jump in. Thanks so much for that, Steve. So it sounds like if we're talking about risk assessment, we really tried to go with we were presented with a very low risk or lower risk plan. And I do think tonight that we will first start off, and this is sort of laying this out for everyone, start off first talking about the plan that was presented. And then as the conversation moves, I'm guessing we'll also talk about higher risk plans, so hybrid plans. But in looking at any plan that we put forward, when we were talking about finite resources, one of the finite resources we have is money. Just to put it bluntly, I know we received money from the CARES Act. We also set aside some money, and I didn't know if you had any, beyond kind of the money that we've set aside, any idea of the specific things that we need to purchase, things that we have purchased, and what else we will need to spend our money on moving forward, not just with the plan as presented, but if we were to look at additional hybrid models.
Sure. So far, we've spent about $35,000 on masks and PPE, trying to have the stores ready, the on hand to go. And it includes hand sanitizers in every room. We've done outside of every office, every room, MERV 13 filters, updating our air circulation in our schools, masks, plexiglass shields. And this was focused for the first blush at Harold, but certainly we can expand that and go. One of the we added through this process electrostatic cleaners, which we think is a nice efficient way to clean. Things that we may have to look at, increase if we do have adults that that qualify for significant accommodations. We may have to have extra personnel, so they can be the eyes, ears, nose, if you will, in a classroom and support. So a teacher could teach. For example, if I was the only, I used to teach math. If I was the only calculus teacher, honestly, we probably couldn't hire another calculus teacher. And if I had concerns, I could teach calculus remotely, but we'd like to have somebody in the classroom to support the kids and make sure they're all set. So some personnel, if we're going to a more higher percentage of kids and a more in person, there is going to be some people that will require that kind of accommodation. So we might need some additional personnel to support that. One of the issues is we're trying to figure out the most efficient, cost-effective way to take a look at the buses and how are we going to use an electrostatic spray? Are we going to work with, I have a meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock with our contract manager to go through all those and trying to get those costs. So our bus a disinfectant process is an additional cost. We'll continue with more masks and more PPE and some personnel, cleaning supplies, the daily, having wipes available when we change computers at some of our schools or we change. So we want to have all that kind of cleaning stuff available too.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on that real quick?
Yeah, please.
Steve, how long would the PPE last that you bought for $35,000 worth? Just do you have a forecast on that?
Well, it depends. So we have them on hand for, it depends how, on hand. But we looked at numbers through October, November, feeling that that's where we wanted to see where we were. We had $46,000 in CARES money. We have $40,000 allocated out of unreserved fund balance for services. That's not just supplies, but that's some services. So, one of the neighboring districts spent $100,000 on some of these supplies, and that's something we don't have that kind of ability. But Michelle and I kind of planned through October, November, having enough supplies and seeing where we were at that point.
Thank you.
I'll jump in on maybe switch gears to facilities and logistics a little bit, if that's okay, Jim.
That sounds great. Thanks, Rob.
And I don't know if this is for Steve or if Amy and Rebecca want to come in, but I think folks would be curious to know, like, what did the hybrid model look like at both at the middle high school and at Maple Street? And then so if you could sort of characterize that for us, and then maybe talk to us a little bit about how the facilities get in the way of executing that plan. Because I think that was part of what was put forward on Thursday. Does that make sense? So maybe we just start with, what would a hybrid plan look like at each building?
Start with Amy, go ahead.
Our team looked at a couple of different hybrid approaches. We looked at a green-white day. So a cohort of students would come on Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, everyone would be home so that we could deep clean those spaces. And then another cohort would come on Thursday, Friday. We also talked a little bit about students coming every other day, just that either you are coming on a green day or coming on a white day. The challenges at Maple Street really were rooted in the isolation rooms, so that when you require that if someone has some symptoms and they present with them, if you've been at Maple Street, you know that we have a very small nurse's office suite. There is an adjacent room, but there's just one space, and there aren't a lot of other areas. In terms of being able to have we could accommodate, I felt when I set up classrooms and measured, we could accommodate 50% of the population. So right now, as of today, the population at Maple is 224 enrolled students. So on a green day, we had about 113 kids and then 111 kids on the other day. And just reimagining those spaces, I really feel like, we don't have a lot of, if you've been in Maple Street, we're just really got Main Street and a lot of classrooms in that space, but we don't have, a lot of floors or a lot of nooks and crannies where we could, set up classrooms. So a 50% population was really what we were looking at.
And Amy, how many kids would that put in most classrooms during the day?
Yeah, about 10. 10 or 11. Some had, when I looked at when I created the cohorts, 10 or 11. One cohort had 9.
So one of the schools I looked at today, they talked a little bit about an assumption of how many students might not come. And their assumption was 15% of their population wouldn't arrive. Was that something that you guys thought about, or?
We didn't really have hard data yet, Rob, but yes, we did think about the families that we knew would go remote. Looking at the survey, we were thinking about 15%. So certainly, I didn't have any at that point when we were planning. I also was trying to, be flexible with what families might need. Once they saw the plan, they might think, oh, well, I would be okay with that level of risk, sending my student on Monday and Tuesday. I wanted to be able to plan for the largest number of students possible.
Sure.
But yes, we did talk about, that we knew that some students couldn't couldn't return based on, what we know about them medically, or things that we know about their families medically. We knew that there would be folks that would need that remote option as well.
And so on the green white day, would it have been a full day for half of those students, sort of a typical schedule?
Yes. And then, I know that Steve talked about this in the previous meeting, but we also had, after school care. So for some students, they would have a full day plus, if there are students that go to the Boys and Girls Club, they would be able to offer that as typical. But yes, the students on a green day or a white day, if they were in school, it would be a full day.
And if for the kids who weren't in school, what would they be doing?
Well, it
What
would
have
be,
been the design?
yeah, it was a remote, so they would be at home, either working on assignments. We had talked about a couple of different models that they would, during the in-person instruction, the teacher would set them up to be doing follow-up, application, and practice when they were at home. The day where we would be deep cleaning and offering, some in-person services, the students would also be doing enrichment and extension activities. And, I know that there are also students that need intervention, so we could provide a little bit maybe longer or more frequent blocks on those Wednesdays for students that would need it as well.
Thank you very much. So Rebecca, can you sort of enlighten us a little bit about the middle high school? Definitely not the ease of Main Street at Maple, more like the labyrinth of the Minotaur, but
Good call, Rob.
yeah.
Well, like Amy said, we worked a long time. It was really interesting. Chris has gone weekly to meetings of the area school principals, and they've all been talking about this. In conjunction with that, we've also, Steve Rothenberg over at CRTC in Concord at the Regional Tech Center, he pulled together the 9 sending schools, and we also had a mini conversation that happened a few times just to try to see how much we could align our different plans, where we were at, and how could we still continue to send kids to CRTC. So we definitely, for a very long time, were on the hybrid model. We tried to go way outside the box at first. We started by could we look at just 7 periods a day instead of 8? It was kind of driven actually by the middle school, dropping out some of the study hall time maybe, or consolidating some of the unified arts, doing some shifts there and seeing if we could not pack the day really full. We were worried about how much do you put into a single day, because we've been used to the block for so long. So a lot of conversations there. We realized contractually the 7 period day just wasn't going to work. We wouldn't have enough people for duty. And like covering lunches, things like that, covering study halls at the high school. We needed that. So we did do it, by the way, we did an audit of all the high schoolers and the requests, how many credits. The majority of kids were between 6.5 and 7.5 credits. Those that were on the 7.5, they were additional electives. It wasn't going to harm anyone's ability to graduate on time if we were to shift it to 7. So we did do that full audit, which was a lot of work. We moved away from that, and that's kind of when we started our same conversations as Maple Street. We looked at going green and white. So doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like we did during the spring with that day in the middle, and then Thursday, Friday. We were there for a really long time. We've gone pretty far down that road in detail. The big thing for us was we were trying to maximize FaceTime with teachers if we were going to go hybrid. It seemed once a week was hard. We explored a lot, and we did some work with our teachers around first their comfort level, and then what kind of professional development would be needed for them to be able to teach half the class in front of them at face while simultaneously half the class is online. So that you weren't just getting your lesson once a week. We thought 1 80-minute block a week was not going to cut it. So the original green white said what you do with your green kids, the green team on Monday and Tuesday, you do with the white team on Thursday and Friday. But we realized that's once a week, and then the rest they're left to do on more online instruction on their own. We weren't comfortable with that. So we shifted to say, can we do green team is in on Monday, Tuesday, and they're in the class but online Thursday, Friday, while the white team is online Monday, Tuesday, and then in person Thursday, Friday.
So
Um,
when you say, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, please.
When you say online, do you mean like synchronous? So like if I've got half my class I'm teaching in 202, then the other half is watching and experiencing it that way?
Right, right. And we explored, can we buddy people up, a person in the classroom with a person who is online? So, if there's questions to be asked, you've got a person in the class that can say, Rob's got a question online, things like that to try to help. We're very excited. I don't know if poor Mr. Stone is quite as excited. We did get accepted into the first cohort for Canvas. Canvas is the learning management system that UNH uses to help facilitate all of their online pieces for students. So we're going to be going down that road as well. And we think that will offer a very unified, clear platform for everybody to use. We can be very consistent. Hopefully in an ideal world, as we move into this further, it will talk nicely with our student management system. So I know one of the problems we had in the spring was grades were being recorded in Aspen, assignments were being given feedback in Google Classroom, and for students and parents that became a surprise sometimes about what was a grade, what was happening. So trying to find a system that can help us streamline all of that was important. We used Google Meet during the spring, but recognizing it had some limitations. The Canvas opportunity comes with Zoom licenses for all of our teachers. Zoom allows for breakout rooms. It allows for panel sessions like this. It allows for better ways to have discussions with students, and then some variety there. So it as well as some other things, but that's the kind of the overview. So, we did spend a lot of time. How will that work? What does our professional development there look? Can we help that balance what we're trying to offer? Our latest shift, we actually went back to the 8-period day. I should say part of the, we before we went to the 8-period day, we said, instead of doing the day in the middle, can we maximize instruction by bringing that Wednesday to Monday, doing like a preview day. So the classes are about half hour, 40 minutes long, lay out the expectations for the week, and then go green team Tuesday, Wednesday, white team Thursday, Friday. We played with that for a while. A conversation with a staff member today actually said, well, can we go skinny every day? Because we were kind of playing with the skinny schedule and what did it look like and what would the impacts be. And so we've been playing with that a little bit as an option, going an 8-period day every day, doing a green team and a white team, or a day 1 student and a day 2 student.
So in regard to the building itself,
Yeah.
because I think, it's come up, Bow High School is going back, everybody, and that's a very different facility structure, wide hallway. So what were the logistics about just moving kids in the building that were problematic? And maybe for folks who don't know the middle high school as well,
Yeah, so if you take a tour of the middle high school, it's really, we joke around that we have 5 floors. We are like a glorified split level ranch house though, with those 5 floors. They're all like half floors from each other. And in reality, the high school itself is one hallway. We actually are a main street for the high school. There's the English alcove, which is like this little pod of classrooms, and then it extends down the long 2nd floor with math, science, and technology things. And that's pretty much our high school. So the original guidance, talking about trying to keep one directional pathways as much as possible, not the crossing in the hallways. We did take a classroom and measure out what does it look like with 6 feet of space. Most of our rooms, especially in the additional area, they're all trapezoidal kind of rooms. They have a funny shape to them. And they all have trapezoid tables in them. So the tables actually help because you can say 1 student at a table, but we can fit 12 in a classroom. And so following the guidelines given to us, 12 is it. So we've looked at that a lot. The one-way hallway, when it is just one hallway, we kind of joked around about, well, it's a nice mask break to come out, but it wouldn't be on a rainy day, So just trying to figure out some of those schematics. We can do an isolation room. We did try to figure that out with it's not ideal, but it would be minimal impact to the rest of the building. So we were able to identify that. We felt okay with that. Did that pretty much?
I think so. Yeah, I think hopefully it gave people a good sketch of what was being thought about and some of the complications. I think Steve already talked about the staffing, so I'm sure that's all part of that mix. So I'll turn it back to the crew here.
I actually had if it's okay, I had just a follow-up question. I know that we discussed the 5 days a week, half day option for Harold Martin, but I didn't know if anything like what Amy or Rebecca just talked about, 2 days a week or 3 days a week, but more full days were looked at as a hybrid model at Harold Martin.
Certainly by me. In fact, I think when I started this process with the wonderful committee, to me, that was the default. I figured that's probably what we would do. I thought maybe that's what the team would want to come up with. But over time, we realized that, if we look at the three big, I don't want to talk too much about this and get too big picture, but we really had three things in mind. One, what's best for kids academically, and that was the focus of one of our committees, because we had like 8 subcommittees in this group. We had to follow federal and state guidelines regarding safety. And the third thing really was accommodate families as best as possible. So the thought was, and it was kind of a bold and grand thought, to be honest, but it was, what if we brought kids in every day? They'd have the consistency of instruction every day. Even though it would be shorter, we'd see them every day. And then it would take away the remote learning problems or responsibility for parents and kids on the off days, because there wouldn't be off days. There'd be an off afternoon or morning, but not a full day or 2 days or whatever. So, again, as you could see, the discussion today, we get a lot of feedback from parents. It's very clear, at least from the parents I heard, and of course you hear from parents that might have concerns. You may not hear from parents that don't have concerns. So, the data isn't necessarily perfect on these situations. But we do realize, and I've talked to some teachers, that the half-day thing is really difficult. And we tried to help parents, and we still would do this, by bringing in a boys or girls club or a tween school and home option for the off morning or the off afternoon. But again, that's limited. I think we figured only about 36 kids given regulations, and there's new regulations from the state for daycares, which is really what this is. So just a long answer to your question. I think we'll probably go back to the drawing board and consider maybe a more traditional, it's funny we're saying traditional, none of this is traditional, but in my mind is traditional hybrid model that might be easier for parents. I think it's easy for parents to find a full day off, but we have so much work to do. But the work's been going on in my mind anyway. We kind of went for the golden ring, and I'm not sure we're going to be able to grab it for lots of reasons. And there's no blame to anybody about anything, because this is just all hard. But to answer your question, I think the other problem too is busing, as we talked about in the leadership team today. If Harold Martin is doing a whole different program, I'm not sure we can accommodate the busing if Maple Street and Hopkinton Middle High School are doing a more traditional or a different version of busing. We're too small to have that sort of flexibility.
Sure, I think
helps.
Well,
a lot
yeah,
of rings.
Well,
Bill-
oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if we're gonna, but you brought up busing, and so okay, me and Rob are on the same wave,
Right.
because and I talked a little bit to Steve, I think today or yesterday, and Steve had actually mentioned he's meeting with the contractors tomorrow. So I guess if you don't mind just digging in a little bit on the challenges we have with transportation specific to the Hopkinton district, because obviously all districts are different. But what are those challenges for us here in Hopkinton with our the contract for busing? And then what we need to overcome, I think, in order to satisfy and meet the requirements and our obligations in terms of providing that transportation option for students.
Sure. We don't have our own bus company, in district. Bo, for example, has our own bus drivers, so we purpose bus drivers who aren't being used to clean and do other things, where we have a contract with First Student. Originally, the first guidance that came out for us was about 12 students in a bus, and they've now been expanded. And many districts are going with the 24, which is 1 per seat. And we can, some districts are saying next to the window with windows open, regardless of season. With having the windows open, they believe circulates and that reduces the contagion nature. Some districts are going 2 in a seat all the way around. They're going up to 36 youngsters, 2 in a seat. So now, obviously, and some also say, that you can have family members if family members want to sit next to you, you can group there. So we have budgeted, contracted for 16 bus runs and plus charters. So that's our commitment. So we have 8 in the morning and 8 in the afternoon. We did try to work, if we were, in the original thought was if we were about 25% 4 through 12, we could cover that with, and 50% P through 3, we could cover that with a different ratio of bus runs, and that could squeeze out some midday bus runs to support families in that area. The question did come up, and it's on the list to talk tomorrow, is about, do we disinfect every, in the midday? Do we do it in the morning? Do we do it after? Do it twice a day? Do we do it weekly? Do it daily? Some districts are going monthly. Some, I think, are bi-weekly. I don't know, Michelle, I don't know if you've heard anybody going weekly, daily. I haven't heard that yet. And I don't think the guidance, I don't remember, and if I missed it, I don't remember guidance on bus disinfectant. So we have a contract and we work with those 16 trips. And are people, if the board's comfortable with 24, I would say, based on my connections with regional superintendents, that's a number that the regional are using 24, 1 per seat, which times 24 times 8 would give us how much we get each morning and afternoon.
So talking about, the risk management piece, and depending upon which guideline you want to talk about, 3 feet or 6 feet, clearly 24 on a bus, whether they're all against the window or they're diagonal, is not 3 feet.
Right.
School buses are 2 feet apart and 36, 39 inches long. It's a weird fact to know. So like, is that something that we're just willing to accept and say that, their kids, the young kids are transmit less to each other? At least that's one belief.
With a mask requirement, some people are looking at this as social distancing or mask. We were looking at redundant supports at most places, so we're pretty close to 3 feet, but we'll have every student with a mask, thinking that's that situation where we do have a mask and as much as we can next to an open window. Is the board comfortable with that scenario for assumption of risk?
Right.
I would not be without a mask on the bus because of what you just talked about, Rob, but bus, open window, pretty close to 3 feet if we have it full, but that's where we're at. And we'd have to get, and this is what Amy talked about, and the next stage is getting, and Jim talked about it, it's not a survey, it's really some registration. What if we do have 200 people that would like bus transportation? And Andrew, to your question, would we pay for more bus runs? And would we double up and stagger? Would we have and people might remember that we used to have 2 bus runs. We used to have 4 buses run the entire town, and then the next left 4 buses run the entire town. And I was here when and I don't know if Rob, if you remember the controversy when we had kindergartners and first graders with seniors, well, not many seniors, but sophomores on the bus. So we have done 2 bus runs. 2 waves of buses, and it just makes it. If you remember, it was longer bus runs.
Steve, do we under our? I mean, obviously, we would pay more, but do we have the ability to, with our contractor, to do additional bus runs? They have the capacity to do that.
We think so. I mean, because there are some of their biggest clients are full remote.
Okay.
They're not running any buses. So, and I did talk with First. First is can I say giant company? It's a giant
That's
company.
Fair.
And so if they're working with one of the 10, 20 districts that have gone full remote, and we have had they brought people when we've had a shortage from other depots to support us. So I think right now, because of some of their clients, I did talk to our bus contract manager today. Yes, some of their customers are full remote.
Steve, what was the survey results, if I recall, we had it for parents using the bus system or students using it?
I would think about 2/3 weren't, and it wasn't necessary.
Do you think that if, let's say, this board down the road decided to modify the plan, would it be possible to have a survey submitted out again saying, in order to do this, we need to have this type of commitment from the community regarding bus transportation? Because I know a lot of parents would forego the opportunity to use the bus in order to maximize the opportunity to be in school. Is that something that maybe for logistics, we could look at that if we decided to alter the plan?
That's essential. No, I agree with you, Norm. I think that's essential. And what Rob alluded to too, I did have some parents said, Steve, my kids aren't going to the bus. They're not willing to assume the risk, Rob, that you just described. They will, I was reading an article that a parent provided me today where a district with incredible bus piece looked for as much carpooling. Looked for the neighbor to say, look, let's take the pressure off the buses, have as few people on the buses as possible, and have neighbors help neighbors and carpool and bring kids. So I agree with you, Norm, but I think there are some parents who did used to ride the bus who aren't willing to have the less than 3 feet with a mask, even with the open window. And I get that. I mean, there's no tone here. That's but I think getting a hard number, as Norm, as you alluded to, is an important thing in how we do it, because maybe we go back to the 2 wave. We have a 7:30 wave and an 8:30 wave. It's been a long time. Actually, I haven't thought about that in a long time since this meeting, where we had 2 different waves go throughout the town.
And Bo has added one layer to that, where kids come on, they have their mask, hand sanitized as they're coming on the bus, and then assigned seating. And if they're not willing to hand sanitize or wear a mask, you can find a pony to school apparently or something. But
yeah, thank you. No, I think those guidelines are right on, spot on, Rob. So thank you. It's not just the mask, the hand sanitizer, and hopefully get by. And lots of discussion with our bus drivers. I think it was either, that's a tough job. It's a tough job. Now you got to make sure, and if a kid drops, mask comes off, or all of a sudden it's someone described as an eye patch, and I don't know. But I think we have to work on professional development, supporting, and the why. And we're an instructional based organization. We have never shirked from a challenge to educate and instruct kids about stuff. So I think that's what we do. That's in our wheelhouse.
And I guess while we're on the bus drivers, I guess a quick question, Steve, would be, are the bus drivers also going to have daily health checks like the students and employees?
Yep. They will have screenings. They'll be wearing a mask, all that stuff as well. And they will attend some of our PD. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. So while we're on logistics, one of the questions that I know, I think we spoke about on Thursday, but I just wanted to bring it up because it's been mentioned several times. It's just around, we talked about utilizing space in all of our buildings. And so I do think there's also an ask, or sort of a conversation around, how can we make best use of outdoor space at our buildings? And I'm just sort of curious for the building administrators. So how do you see sort of the outdoor space being utilized in terms of a hybrid plan, or any plan for that matter?
Rebecca, you want to start? We'll go backwards. Rebecca to Amy to Bill. We'll do something different.
Poor Amy's always in the middle, though.
Well, we'll do Amy first.
I'm used to it.
Oh, child. We've talked about it a lot. We have a lot of teachers that on an ordinary school day use the outside space. We have the pavilion as a shaded outside space. To be very honest, the middle of the field would be pretty brutally hot on some of these days. But as far as, using the woods, a lot of our classes do that. Going outside just to sit and use the picnic tables to write or to draw or to read or hold a seminar. We do that, and we can continue to do that. As long as teachers, take a walkie-talkie or their cell phone. So if we need to get a hold of them, or they need to get a hold of us, they can. We're really good with outside space.
And I would agree with Rebecca.
Lunches. I want to say that.
I would agree with Rebecca. We're lucky at Maple Street. We have a beautiful set of fields behind us that teachers utilize, whether it's for a science lesson or to be able to just do some work outside. We've talked about eating outside, asking Maple Street students to bring maybe a yoga mat or a beach towel or something that they could sit outside. We have a few picnic tables, not that many, but that, I think we could accommodate that. We also have a beautiful garden. So we, some staff routinely eat out there, there, and students can gather out there as well. We did talk in some of our meetings about having tents outside. It just seems problematic to monitor. If you've ever been to a cross-country race and saw a tent get taken up, it can be a pretty scary situation. So we were really thinking about, again, going back to our resources, maybe we could rent some larger tents that could be professionally installed, but for the small amount of time that we could use them, September, October, maybe early November, I just wasn't sure if the cost would be worth it. But we do have some real outdoor space that we could use at Maple as well.
As far as Harold Martin School, I have 2 work groups going on from the original committee, one looking at remote learning and Canvas and some of those things, but the other one looking at outdoor education. I need to touch base with them and see how that's going and join them a little bit. From the very beginning, our teachers talked about getting outdoors as much as possible for lots of safety reasons. And I think, Amy was right. I'd love to get some permanent tents, and maybe this is a call to the community if anybody, owns Taylor Rental or knows somebody who does or whatever. It would be a good thing. Now, one problem we do have at Harold, which is unique to us right now, we're starting construction maybe tomorrow or Thursday. Literally, the big dozers are going to be in tomorrow, doing more than we did at the groundbreaking, really digging up. And so literally, and the community should probably know this, the whole area in front of, like where my office is and the walkway and the main entrance, almost that whole area is going to be gone from really from any use at all. The main entrance will not be allowed. I just found that out. So that's another logistical thing we're trying to figure out. So our space is going to be limited. We'll use the other side of the building, what we call the dinosaur side, because there's a dinosaur on that side. It's really a really nice area. We just never really used it much. So we'll be creative, but I like the tent idea. I really do. And it'll last at least through November, I would think. And but the construction is going to be interesting and fun.
Thank you, Bill. And don't sell yourselves short. You guys made a massive hole. I think the 6 of you with your golden shovels at the groundbreaking.
Yeah, right.
Mine's the deepest.
So back to sort of after this we move to staffing, but in logistics, our ability to clean all the facilities throughout the day. Do we have enough custodians? How would we manage that if we were in a hybrid scenario at all 3 schools?
Michelle had two stuff today. I don't know if she wants to take this or she'd like me to take this one.
No, I can. I do have some reservations about us being able to have the staff to be able to manage all the spaces, whether it be some have health issues themselves or not. So we are and have been trying to get a hold of a cleaning company to find out what the costs would be in order to do something like that. And maybe it's not an everyday thing, but maybe it is on, like, I'll just use the Wednesday scenario, that the deep cleaning, and maybe they can manage to do, the other days. It's really trying to be sensitive to what we saw in the very beginning stages when nobody was in the building and there was hardly, there wasn't a lot of staff around in the custodial area. So I just don't know what to expect with, understanding it could be half being around and everybody would be protected. So we're still trying to evaluate that. So I wish I had more information on that, but.
We have struggled getting fully staffed in the custodial area for a long time, and we haven't been able to be fully staffed. So we've run ads and if we can look to fill more, we can try again to fill a position. But I think having a supplementary cleaning on hand to accommodate for it will be necessary.
So I might just switch gears a little bit and kind of move off of logistics. And I know we've talked about this a bit, or at least it's been alluded to. So again, just seeing if we can just going maybe a little bit deeper, just around, there's been a lot of, we've talked about, staffing concerns about workforce. And so this may be really just a question for Steve, but I'm just wondering if you could just help us understand, when we talk about accommodations for teachers for, maybe underlying conditions, can you just talk us through like what that means, what that means as the superintendent, what that means to you, and then sort of what is the process, just to kind of just walk us through like how does that come up, how are decisions made, like how does that work? I think there's many people out there, it's probably a little bit of a mystery for sort of what accommodation means and how that process works.
Sure, and it can happen. I mean, we had requests for accommodation outside of the virus as well. So, a teacher would make a request with documented medical documentation on requesting an accommodation to work under these conditions under the Americans with Disability Act, the ADA. That comes in. Sometimes it goes to me. Sometimes it goes to Michelle, a principal. We have a HR assistant. One of the things that's a struggle is, we've talked about this a long time, we do not have a dedicated full-time director level position in human resources. So all our building principals are part of HR. Michelle leads that area, but as you know, she leads a few areas. Michelle and I work very collaboratively on all these requests. Lori Nato, who's our HR assistant, is a member of the work group of a listserv, and she gets great information. And so when we log the request, and then we're actually meeting tomorrow, because through Lori and Michelle's hard work, we've got some wonderful support documents from other districts that we will apply to all these requests and go through the checklists and go through the flow charts on making sure we respond. And then when we have deeper questions, we use Primex as our HR support vendor. So Michelle will call Primex and say, this is what we're thinking, to run it by our supports. So each one is evaluated on a case-by-case basis based on the medical documentation and what we can apply. It could be, we've had requests for in the past for air purifiers in the rooms based on things. So we work with Primex and they review that request and they give us a suggestion of an appropriate air purifier. And then we place, and then we maintain that. And that would be a request based on someone's breathing condition in a school. So the HR component is extensive, and HR working remotely. Michelle's remote, sometimes I'm remote, sometimes Lori's remote. So tomorrow we're getting in the same room, we're using all our resources. We want to make sure Families First, that act, the ADA, will go through our legal responsibilities. And then there's also another level of a contractual obligation. So we have had staff, as you know, as this board knows, request leave. So in our collective bargaining agreement, a staff member can request leave, and the board takes that up in a full transparency vote. So managing the human resources component of this is not insignificant. In our level of staffing, it makes it a higher challenge because there isn't someone dedicated full-time to every workshop, to every legal component who does this day in and day out. It's a piece of all our jobs. But one of the things that Michelle and Lori, we are a very collaborative district, so we get lots of support. Today, I got a sample form from another district in the Southwesters that I'll present to Michelle and Lori tomorrow to revise. It's a wonderful, seemed like a very systematic approach to questions. And they actually said, Steve, you may find this valuable. So that's the kind of relationships we have. But we will be evaluating everyone within the eyes of the regulation, of the collective bargaining agreement, of the medical documentation, and respond.
I guess I'll jump in. So I'm going to skip down to the special education section. And Mandy, if you could talk to us a little bit about meeting the needs of an IEP when we're in a remote model and when we're in a hybrid model, and what that in-person, in the word supervision was used. What are the dynamics of those variations? So what does it look like if we're full remote? What does it look like if we're remote and kids with IEPs are coming in for some direct services, and if we were in a hybrid?
So by design, it's all going to be individualized for the student and what their needs are. So really it will come, depending on what the general education plan is, whether it's full remote or hybrid. when we know what they're receiving for their general education, we can then say, okay, how can we support that general education based on that model? But then also think about what are their individualized needs and other services that we need to provide, and then make decisions from there. And really, it's an individualized education plan. It really will be lots of conversation and lots of communication and collaboration between families and the case managers and the special educators and the general educators to make sure the kids are getting what they need. But really, it will come down to each individual kiddo.
Would you foresee in the situation or the plan that was rolled out on Thursday, there was some talk of special ed students coming in for support. So how would that, like, what's the transportation piece to that? What are some of the logistics to that? What are some of the PPE scenarios?
Right.
All of that business.
Yeah. So think about if we have a student who needs an evaluation. Depending on the student, we can maintain that 6 feet distance, right? Whether it be age, maturity level, things like that. We can maintain those things pretty easily with masks, with a hand sanitizer available, all of those things. Some kiddos are going to need closer support with some of those evaluations, depending on what they are. And then we start asking, okay, masks and shields together, gowns, whatever that is. And we'll just use the guidance based on the students that we know we're going to be working with. We're going to do whatever we can. First and foremost, it's all just got to be safe. And that'll be a case by case basis for those students for the evaluations. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to do these evaluations, we want to make sure they're deemed as valid. We don't want to do them again. We don't want to process that is intended to meet a student's need to hinder it, because we're not taking that into consideration. So those things will all be taken into account. As far as their services go, again, it'll depend on the student and what their needs are. A reading intervention might be different and look completely different than a speech intervention. So those will be case by case. And as far as logistics, as far as transportation, those kind of things, again, it's working things out with families and making sure and having really close contact with Steve and bus runs and thinking about all of those things depending on what's happening and just making it work. And it might just be that parents will have to bring their kids in, and if they can, then great. And if they can't, we figure something else out.
Thank you.
So I don't know how to ask this question, and so forgive me if it doesn't come out right. But it's really it's a question for everybody, and it's really I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So we talked about risks early on, and a lot of the conversation around risks is how do we mitigate the risk of the disease in our population? But another way to think about risk, and it's been pointed out by a lot.
I'm just covering my face so people can.
Of community members.
No, I'm talking.
A lot of ways that people think about risk is on the other side. Like, what's the risk of the social emotional side of our kids, of not being part of the school community, of the risk of not being in classroom learning? And so I'm just, as the board sort of takes all this information together and we kind of cobble it together and figure out what a path forward is. I mean, the one thing that is weighing on my mind is, what are we as educators, as our professional educators here, like what are our children missing out on by not being in the school community? And that sounds like a very simple question. And maybe it's almost like, O'Brien, you're pretty dumb asking this question, but I am really interested in terms of as educators, like, what are the risks on the other side of not going forward with a hybrid plan or sticking with this remote plan, as people who see our children every day and know them and care for them? I'm really curious in your honest assessment on that question. And whoever wants to start, Ken, I'm sorry.
Well, I don't mind starting if you want. Someone put this in the chat Q&A already a little bit about the AAP report, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they came out, a little more, I guess you could say, liberal in the sense that, they talked a lot about kids needing to come back to school. Jim, you talked about risk versus reward, and I've talked about that with parents too. There is a risk for kids being home. I think we know that. My own daughter's a kindergarten teacher in Manchester, And, you know, she tells me stories without names, of course, or pictures, but of some of her kids. And obviously her school and her city is a whole lot different than Hopkinton. But it's a clear problem for some kids to be home. So, you know, part of our discussion, certainly at the Harold Martin level, especially, was, you know, balancing the need for, you know, that safety at the same, you know, in terms of the virus, at the same time, making sure that kids get the social emotional learning and just the contact. And, you know, and some parents, you know, obviously they need to go to work, and it just brings stress to a family. All of this has. So, that's what's so difficult about this crisis, I think, because we know that you turn left, you turn right. There's a little bit of danger no matter where you go. And so we're trying to eliminate that as much as we can, or bring it down to a point where we feel comfortable. That's what makes this topic so difficult. And that's why parents are so passionate about this. And that's why it's so difficult to get, you know, just the right decision for our town. And every town and city has been so different in the state as well, because they're grappling with the same issues. So to me, it's the danger of not having students to spend time with the people they really should be with during the day, and that's their teachers. Simply put, maybe that's just a cliche, but that was our overriding belief as we went in. As by we, I mean our Harold Martin group, as we went into discussing this, as well as the leadership team.
Someone else want to jump?
I would say that, you know, we have spent a lot of time thinking about our students. Of course, we think the best place for them is in the classroom, in the school, if these were normal times. You know, the social emotional aspect of being at home for some kids is devastating. Those of you that know Lynn Lyons, you know, she's a leader in anxiety. She's doing a podcast right now, and she did a whole podcast on, you know, this topic, you know, from high school down to preschool, and the impacts on social emotional learning. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, really resonated with me was knowing your student. You know, there are some kids that have really done well during social emotional learning because the pressures of school were so difficult for them. And then there are kids, you know, your extroverted kids that are, you know, really want the time on the soccer team, and, you know, are really, you know, really struggling to be outside of school. You know, it really is each individual family and parent or caregiver thinking about their individual student, and then filling that gap between what they have and what they're getting. And, you know, these just aren't, you know, they aren't normal times, and it's really hard to think about all of those pieces. Reading a lot about, you know, at Maple Street, and in my own professional practice, I'm a strong proponent of responsive classroom, and so I've gone to some webinars and reading some books and some resources that they're putting out. You know, how do you build a community and a sense of belonging in a remote setting? And some places have done it really well. I'm excited to learn about Canvas. I know that, you know, some schools just do a lot of online learning, and they're, you know, successful in building an online community. And you know, so I know the situation is just, there's so many factors, and it's so complex. I understand that there are kids, I know that there are kids in our community and across the country that are better at school, that their social emotional well-being is better served at school. I just don't know how you do it during a time of a global pandemic and keep everybody safe.
I think I would echo a lot of what's already been said. I know that, you know, we've been a grow school community for the past few years. We've focused very much on social emotional learning for students, on trauma informed decisions, things like that. But and I think we worked really hard during the spring part. I'm not going to say it was great to have a trial run, but in a way it was helpful to have that experience, to be able to identify areas where we were strong, areas we weren't so hot in that we need to recalibrate a little bit. I think part of it for us was looking at trying to create as many structures and routines as possible to help bring some comfort and familiarity to what's going on in a kind of crazy situation. But I think for us, it is huge. We've dedicated sometimes significant time to trying to look at the social emotional aspects for kids. I will never forget a senior last year, as we were heading into all this, said, whatever you do, please don't mail us our diplomas. And we would never do that. But that was like that became kind of a mantra on how we make our decisions. We don't ever want somebody to feel like we just mailed something to them and we didn't care about the human piece of it. The human is why we're all here. And I think we've talked a lot about, if and when we do go remote. We started hybrid. I'm going to start there. We started hybrid because we figured any opportunity we have to get to know the kids, to make some connections, to let them understand our routines, our expectations, how we as teachers are using the technology, so that if and when, because everyone says we're going to go remote at some point. So having those connections in place, so that when we go remote, the student still wants to get out of bed and put a shirt on and brush their teeth and show up in class. It's a big deal. And the kids that didn't do that stayed in bed, that we had to call home. We made a lot of phone calls home every single day to check in and say, hey, so-and-so's, we don't see their screen. How are they? What's going on? That's really pivotal, important, and we'll continue those pieces. We think starting the day with advisory, so we know kind of where students are at. That's important. We know who's at least awake and ready and who's not quite showing up. We were so grateful to the police department. It's incredibly sad that we had to call Chief Pecora a couple times, but he was really good about, if we said, we haven't had contact with this kiddo all week and we're nervous, he'd show up at the door and he'd have some conversations with parents. So we appreciated that collaboration. It was tremendous. And we tried to do some activities, and we'll continue if we end up hybrid or remote. We're going to continue to find ways for kids to connect. We've already talked about what our club calendar will look like, making sure we have really clear descriptions of all the clubs. Some people have volunteered and said, I'd love to do a walking club, I'd love to do a nature club, I'd love to do some different things that we maybe haven't done in the past. Whether they're stipend positions or not, we probably won't have that, but I think there's a lot of adults that are willing to just step forward and say, I'll help connect with kids. So any of those opportunities where we can take small groups and do things with them, help them connect with each other. I've actually done some professional development on how to help kids pod up with other kids and create small group connections, and kind of going with the mantra that you don't need 12 friends, but you probably need 2 or 3 real close friends. It's important that you have some people you can call up and say, let's do this homework, or wow, today really bit the bullet. But you don't need to have 12 friends right now. You might not be able to have that be possible as much. 12 close friends, we'll say, that you get together with. So we've done some professional development around it. We're not totally ready, but we're getting ready for how to support kids during remote learning to really address that social emotional. We meet weekly, our student support team, which is administrators, nurses, guidance, special education, behavior specialist. We meet every week, and we did during the spring to look at how are people doing. We had almost like a help desk system for teachers to be able to fill out a form if they were concerned about a student, and kind of send us like a little notice, hey, I'm worried about. And then we would use those to kind of look through. We would check attendance, we would check participation, we would check the teacher feedback pieces about students. So we had a decent handle on who was kind of starting to tank, or who was flagging in their energy levels. And we'd reach out with a lot of personal phone calls to parents, to kids, to Google Chats. And we'll continue to kind of keep all those avenues going. We're small but mighty when it comes to those kind of things. So I feel not great. It's important. The connections are really, really important. So it's not great that we wouldn't have everything we usually have in the way that we usually have it, but we'll figure something out for them.
So similar to Jim's question, but probably on the flip side of it, I would imagine that coming back into a hybrid system is going to provoke some anxiety, and there'd be some social emotional risk to that. It's a new scenario. School's not going to look like it was in any, even as they're trying to imagine that. So obviously the goal would be to set kids at ease. So I'm just wondering if, as part of your hybrid planning, if you thought about how to transition kids back in, would it be step by step by grade, small groups? You know, how, I would assume you don't want 50% capacity on the first day and try to work it out. So how are we going to retrain kids to this new normal that would be school in a hybrid situation where we've got mass social distancing, one-way corridors? What would we do?
Amy, you want to go first? You can be the.
Just taking a couple of notes. That's a really great question, Rob. And yes, our, you know, at the, when we were meeting with our task force, we talked a lot about, you know, what would it look like to have students come back into the building. And one of the things that Steve was very supportive of is, you know, having teachers meet their kids before in those 2-week window for the delay of school. You know, if we're able to start the school year and have the first student day be September 14th, that we could do some really purposeful work on connecting with each one of the kids that will be coming back. You know, we didn't have our traditional transition activities. So, you know, I'm taking a 4th grade class from Bill that, you know, they've seen a video and maybe they practice basketball in our gym, but, you know, they didn't get the, you know, the treatment that we usually give. And I'm sure that Rebecca feels the same way. You know, the 6th grade class that I'm sending her, you know, they usually, you know, we really do try to roll out the red carpet and provide opportunities for kids to see the building, to see the people, to really feel like this is going to be their home or their community for the next, you know, several years of their education. So I would envision, you know, those couple of weeks where teachers are doing professional development, that we're again trying to have meetings and connections with families, trying to provide some opportunity for families to come through the building with their student in socially distant ways. But then also, you know, as you just described, having small numbers of kids start first, you know, because we are going to have to teach them, you know, this is what I don't envy Bill in terms of trying to teach a kindergartner how to wear a mask, but, you know, in 4th through 6th grade, they can tolerate that. And we'll be able to build their stamina for it, you know, similar to how we build stamina for silent reading. You know, we would start small and encouraging collaboration with families to, you know, start having their student wear a mask at home before they come to school, talking about proper hand washing. We did some explicit instruction about that. In the past, we've always had our nurse goes into classrooms and teaches those kinds of things. It would just be more purposeful, more and more ongoing, that we would teach kids about how do you keep yourself safe? You know, here are some things that you can do. And also, you know, we know that there are students that have challenging behavior. You know, some, you know, students really do come to school and that is a factor for them and their ability to access the general curriculum is their tolerance for, you know, for flexibility or to things, you know, to not really be in their control. So, you know, that's a whole other host of a population that we've been talking about. And I have had ongoing conversations with staff and faculty in my building about how will we prepare an environment where these kids can learn these new skills, practice them safely. But also we know that they're not going to be perfect, right? We know that there are going to be mistakes just like in any learning. And we know that kids are going to need new and varied opportunities to learn those new skills. And how do we provide them the time and the ability to practice them? You know, that is going to be, it'll be a lot of work that goes into that, but we have talked about, you know, how do we explicitly teach things like hand washing, mask wearing, safe travel in the hallway? You know, how do you teach those things? What do they look like? What do they sound like? How can you, you know, give kids opportunities to practice that? Does that answer your question? Sure.
It sure does. Thank you.
Can I jump in?
Okay.
I actually have a question. And folks might be receiving some answers from me since I've been answering a few things on the Q&A as well. Amy just sparked this for me. For the 2-week period, I just wanted to a little bit confirm and also ask, that's the period that, and Mandy might know this, the period that we were looking at having those IEP meetings begin. And also when we're talking about offering supports and checking in with kids, I also wanted to double check to make sure that we would be checking in with all kids. So kids who perhaps had been doing well and really struggled, either whether we knew it or not during distance learning, just being sure that we would be checking in with those kiddos as well. So it's sort of a two-part question. I don't know who wants to answer it or verify it for me.
I can speak to the special education portion of it. That couple week window, we won't get all the meetings in, but we can certainly get started with those and really move through a process that we have to per the governor's executive order. So we'll do that fairly swiftly, I think, in those couple of weeks. But really the focus will be on making sure that we're reaching out to the kiddos, not just the kiddos in special education, but all of them, making sure that we know where they're at and maybe what care we need to provide for them to prepare them to come back.
Somebody else want to grab the 2 weeks piece and all that? Rebecca, Bill?
Yeah, I'd be glad to talk a bit. I'm starting to get emails from parents, very respectable emails. It's getting late. Just worried about their kids, and they may have an IEP, they may not. And I think deep down they know we're keeping track and we're really caring about their kids, but it doesn't hurt to send an email to remind. So I'm touching base already with case managers. And one thing, teachers have worked really hard this summer, and they don't work summers normally. They work this summer, a vast majority of them. And, I feel kind of bad in some ways calling up, a case manager and saying, have we thought about this kid? But they do want to get involved now because they know that's what that child needs. So, I know Mandy and I and all the principals, we have to talk soon about so many things. Of course, poor Mandy's brand new at this and just getting to know the kids, but I'm sure you're catching up quickly. I wanted to address real quickly Rob's question from before a little bit, if that's okay. We're going to definitely use those 2 weeks for school meetings with families. Of course, teachers are on this call and they don't realize that's in our plans, but I think they'll appreciate that too. But also, as a school, as Rebecca mentioned earlier, we were really trained strongly in trauma-informed education through the Grow Grant and just some people we hired that have been just wonderful. And two people, our behavior specialists and our school counselor, last year and a little bit, I think the year before, began working in classrooms every day on a rotational basis to talk about behavior in different areas of the school in a very proactive way. And we've already talked about, as Amy was joking, we're probably going to be teaching masks a little bit and teaching other things through those two people. And so they'll be covering classrooms really well, smaller classes too, through that. But I also think one thing we have to be aware of too is our teachers. Like I said earlier, I have a daughter who's a teacher and she's pretty nervous about going back. And dad, myself, I can say it's going to be okay, honey. They'll give you the PPE, but still in your mind, you don't really know, and you're nervous. And she's going to go back. K1 in her district is going back. I think we need to be careful that we just have plenty of support for teachers during the course of the day, during the course of the week. I'm feeling better about having what I call the hallway back. Remote learning was really hard as a principal because I couldn't just walk into, somebody's classroom and say, hey, how was your day today? I guess I could make a Zoom appointment with them, call them up on the phone. It just wasn't the same. It was so much more formal. And so this will be, assuming we can stay in long enough, this will really help. But at the same time, we have to keep on top of the fears that both adults and kids have. And I know, our leadership team and our school board is definitely behind us on that. So that's a good thing.
And Billy, you've got kindergarten placement too. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. In the spring, weren't able to screen kids. Long time ago, we used to place kids in kindergarten by gender, by, I don't know, last name, by gut. We really didn't know anything about them unless they were in our preschool or we had gotten information from their private preschool. But many years ago, we started, doing what we should have done all along, and that is a screening. So we were able to make good classrooms. We weren't able to do that because by the time screening would have happened, we were out remote. So yeah, part of our time before school starts will be bringing in kids and parents to screen, and maybe some other kids in other grades as well. We'll have to talk about that.
So I get a question, I guess, maybe again, switching the topic a little bit. I'm just, we walked through a little bit of it on Thursday, but I'm just wondering if someone would, and maybe it's Steve or maybe it's building specific, I don't know. But sort of walk us through and walk the community through a bit, like, what happens when, and that's always the scary question, right? What happens when, or what happens if, but what happens when, a student has symptoms? That's probably the right way to say it. Like, what's the response? And I think it's just important for us all to understand, like, what's the response from the classroom? What's the response from the district for that type of incident? If you could just walk us through that, just, briefly, that would be helpful.
Sure, and our school nurses have been tending weekly calls, so this would really be directed by our school nurses. But we are, at any symptom, when they come down, they would be isolated, the best we can, and the guidance is to have them ready to be, if they have a symptom, to be sent home. Now, in the plan, there's a lot of different scenarios, but our nurses would communicate with the families. And if it's just some symptoms that subside quickly, after 48 hours or 72 hours of symptom free, we can talk about coming back to school. If they don't, we can talk about having a COVID test. And then, depending if it's positive, then we work with DHHS, and we've had different guidance at different times about who, is it, if we have a strong cohort model and we can keep the youngsters within a small group, it may be just some areas that also join, if there's a positive test, join the quarantine or isolation. And that depends on working with DHHS and getting guidance on what they believe we should do. If it's a lot of intermingling, in some districts in the spring, they did look at closing a school, deep cleaning for a few days and coming back. So our nurses lead that, but we have different, and actually one of the parents asked for a flow chart. I think we'll work on a flow chart with this too. If yes, this, yes, and go down. But we want to make sure that, we have data, strong data, strong, negative COVID test or isolation, trying to do the best we can. But yeah, Jim, our nurses would lead this, working closely with DHHS. We are required to report. And in the same way, if there's a positive test out there for someone in our schools, we would be notified as well.
I'm gonna skip down to, it took a little while, Jim.
I was gonna hop in if no one else was, so I'm glad you did.
So I think one of the questions that's in our list and came up a lot was the success of online learning last spring. And there seemed to be a range, both in terms of how students did in that particular environment. Some kids did really well. They actually liked it probably better than being in school. Others really struggled. There was probably a range in how well instruction was delivered. And I think people are really curious about how will things be different in the fall than they were last spring. So maybe if we could, and Bill, if things are to go remote at Harold Martin School, same there, so maybe by building, if you could talk about what folks might be able to expect. Thank you.
I'd love to jump in. We know that what we provided in the spring amounted to emergency education. And I think overall, given 5 days turnaround and the new dynamic for so many people, we can say it was overall successful based on a low threshold bar. We know that long-term, though, that's not the same case. If this is to be education, not emergency ed, but actual education, then some things have to change. Part of the subcommittee work that we've done is talking about what are the very specific expectations for different groups of students or different groups. So what are the expectations for students? Examples, not limited, but examples. You got to get out of bed. You got to have your camera on. You have to wear a shirt. You have to set up an area that is conducive for you, right? So we'll best practices, but we'll outline some of that for kids. For parents, as hard as this one is, and I don't mean any offense by this at all when I say it, but the older students can't be babysitters during the day. They have to be able to attend their classes. It is their class. They can't pick up extra shifts at work. If it's during class time, they've got to go to class. So asking for the family support to say education is first in these situations. For teachers, there's some minimum expectations that every class, half of the class, you have to be live on camera delivering instruction or interacting with students, minimum. A lot of teachers, they were on the full time, but you can't just post and go. Making sure that there's full interaction for a significant amount of time. Working around grading, working around providing some professional development around assessments, so that assessments make sense. And having a clear format that's similar from teacher to teacher, so that it's a predictable pattern for both students and parents trying to support their students to look at. So I think a big piece of it is how we line up those expectations and what they look like from the start. That's a big piece that changes one from the other. If I can have 2 seconds, I don't want to derail this, but in response to a question, for this, when we were looking at hybrid models, we actually shifted our advisory to first thing in the morning. One is a social emotional check-in. So it's the opportunity for each advisor to have eyes on each of their kiddos, gauge how they're doing for the day. It gives us an indication who's not around, who do we need to check in with right away by calling, doing our traditional attendance calls. And it also gives an opportunity for us to teach some of those things we need to teach, and have some common practices. So when you talk about how do you kind of ramp this up, some of the things we want to do is that. One of the other things in the ramp up we want to do is shift our open house to those first few days, so that there's each class would have maybe 3-4 different sessions for people to sign up to go and to meet small group, the teacher, the students, the families. So you can have small group conversations, just 3 or 4 students in the class at a time, get to know each other a little bit before school even starts, to try to help that. And then we did the schedules that we've created do have some staggered starts. So even if kids come into the building, they have the advisory to go to, but transitioning in the halls are staggered between middle and high school to kind of cut down on things. So we've been looking at, Rob, your question about some of the ramp up activities. We have looked at some of those to do as well. Sorry to derail, but thank you.
I think at Maple Street, the feedback from parents really was that they wanted more live instruction with the teachers. So, in our task force, we really looked at how can we create the most robust remote learning platform with the tools and the materials and within the staff that we have, providing the professional development to be able to do that. So, I created a mock schedule for remote as well as hybrid, and the remote schedule really tries to put some touch points also during the day for teachers to be able to be face-to-face with their students, continuing to do a synchronous morning meeting. So all students and their community coming together at a particular time, providing an office hours for students to be able to see their teacher, to be able to ask questions, and then ending the day with some kind of closing circle where students and teachers are again connecting about their day and what things might look different moving forward. We also are looking at the amount of time for each content area in that remote setting. As we know, there were a lot of guidelines that came out about the amount of time that students could really sustain. So, taking a 50-minute block or maybe an 80-minute literacy block in 4th and 5th grade, and how do you provide that instruction in shorter chunks that would be accessible to most students. And so a remote schedule, really looks at, being able to offer maybe 4 or 5 40-minute chunks or so during the school day. We also, I think, walk back specials probably a little too much at Maple Street. We made it so that the transition, there were some kids that were still very much engaged in art and music and computer literacy and wellness. And then there were others that, it was just enough for them to get through their core academics. So, we had to make allowances, and we each knew that the ability for each family and student to be able to sustain in remote learning was varied. So, how can we in a remote learning model continue to offer those important classes like art and music and computer literacy and wellness in ways that are accessible to all students?
at Harold Martin this summer, I've talked with lots of teachers, and like my friends Rebecca and Amy have said, more synchronous learning probably makes sense. I know parents have asked for that, but just about every teacher I've talked to, I've asked the question, how can we improve, raise the bar on remote learning if we have to go there? I'm not sure a lot of full class synchronous learning works. I mean, once in a while it might, with the little guys, probably third, second grade more than K1. But clearly small groups, maybe more one-on-one. I'm hopeful for Canvas. And again, those teachers listening right now don't even have a clue, except a few who got really excited about the possibility. But if we use Canvas as a kind of our opening software, it's going to make it so much easier for both teachers and families to be able to be, less confused about what platforms. We had a lot of different software platforms that we used. I mean, Google Classroom and Seesaw were the two biggest, but then different teachers use different things. So we just need to bring that together. I think we need reasonable accountability for kids and families, and that's understanding the pressure that families are under. But if we go all remote, I think there needs to be, a little more stated expectations on attendance and that sort of thing. That's hard to do with little guys for sure, when they just really need their parents to help them. I think we're going to have a great advantage of starting together, assuming we're able to start together here in a few weeks, because we can set those expectations face to face with kids, which we really didn't have that opportunity. If you remember, we had a 1 week to get ready for remote learning in March, and bang, we were there. So that was difficult. Teachers want better, more expectations or more consistency around expectations. There's some schools in the state already have done some thinking about this, and I've thrown around some of those ideas to some teachers, and those are pretty good. We probably need to dip into the concept of assessing kids via video conference, something we thought could not be done, and I'm not sure it can be done well. I'm just not sure yet. But assessing is part of the big three of curriculum instruction and assessment, and I think we can't have the other two without assessing. So somehow we have to do that well. But maybe we won't have to go remote, Rob. We'll see.
Maybe not. Thank you, Bill.
Do we have the capability of being able to do synchronized teaching and have an IA on a computer in order to help the students remote in our 3 schools? Is that possible? Would we, if we decided at some point to do a hybrid where live, teacher was in person, and then we had someone there, like an IA, for example, on a laptop monitoring the Zoom, and be able to answer those questions, mute the students, obviously on Zoom, because they, can be a little loud, of course, but be able to have that real-time situation. Would we be able to have something like that potentially?
Matt, you want to talk about that?
I mean, certainly there's 2 pieces. There's a technical component, and then there's just having sufficient staff to do it. And I think having that second adult to help out is really one of our biggest challenges, just in terms of staffing the district. Certainly, we have plenty of tools available to us. As my colleagues have said, we're very intrigued by the statewide adoption of Canvas. We're looking forward to and hoping that can be a tool for us. We're a little uncertain of the timelines yet. The state just was a little moved as fast as state agencies can in getting that going, so that may or may not be ready for the start of school, which obviously would be vastly better if it were ready, but we don't yet have that assurance. So I think we certainly can be creative if we have situations where we need to have partly in person, partly remote. We'll certainly do our best to support all those scenarios, depending on how they come up in the classroom and how we're able to get students working. But just finding ways that really allow students to be successful, and to have that personal connection to their teacher, but also have that support when they need it, and not just say, okay, here's your 5 minutes for this day to get your questions answered, go. I don't think that would be a very successful model. So I'll leave it there.
I think just a quick follow-up, Steve. I'm not sure what the procedure would be or policy is regarding, but if we were understaffed in that type of field, would it be possible to have a volunteer in that position if they're screened and background checked to help with that specific class? Is that something that this board could look at to help alleviate some of that in a classroom environment if need be, or is there certain policies that prevent us from doing that?
Well, it could be an all call for subs or for volunteers. We can certainly look at it. If that's our only barrier, if there are people willing to come in and support, right, as you said, Norm, with background checks, we can certainly look at that. Absolutely.
I think we would have some other considerations, though, with either the policy that we have in place that doesn't necessarily allow volunteers to take the place of teachers, and also just the risk. Like if we're talking about different risk levels, there's a risk for having the more adults we put into our school buildings, the higher the risk.
Agreed.
More people.
Yeah.
Andrea, if I could add to, just to keep it in perspective, we have approximately 23 to 27 consecutive classes running at any given time. So we definitely do not have that many IAs, and the IAs we have are tied to specific students. So that would, normal, I love it.
Yeah, I want to make sure that I'm never trying to replace our teachers. I love our teachers. I'm just trying to find a way to be able to collaborate the classroom experience in a unique situation. Because, I'm just trying to bridge a gap of communication for the students that don't want to go to school. I'm just trying to wrap my head around a potential solution. But, a volunteer will never replace what teachers can do. And that will make that clear. I was just trying to think outside.
I didn't think you said that at all.
Okay. All right. Good.
No, not that at all. Where you said having another adult in the room to do the recording or to answer the questions. We've got 23 to 27 consecutive classes. So that,
yeah.
So I think Andrea's response about the multiple adults or people going into class sort of sparked this question. So Steve, what kind of reporting or self-reporting are we thinking about in terms of I know if I go to a state facility, they ask me a series of questions upon entering, the sort of self-report to make sure that my risk factor is minimal when I enter that facility. I'm just thinking about, is that something we're going to ask parents to do for their children? Is that something that we're going to ask teachers to do? So what's the thinking on that level of responsibility before entering sort of a school facility?
Yeah, that is the guidance, Jim, to do a self-assessment. We have in the support materials, we created a QR code that we can, people can scan and use their phone, and we'll have the nurses collect some information. But yes, our expectation is that before students get on the bus or before they came to school, they would take a self-assessment and work with our nursing staff if there was, a no to any of those questions. We've established a little of an honor system for vendors this summer because we haven't been staffing our buildings, but we'd have it for our vendors, and we try to do as much by appointment as we possibly can so we know they're coming. But yeah, the expectation is we would have a self-assessment for anybody, for faculty, staff, and students coming to our building.
Would it include bus drivers as well, Steve?
Yes, bus drivers, but before they get on the bus, would have to self-assess. Absolutely. Thank you.
So my next question is and it's kind of a question for when when the task force was meeting, and it's really a question about metrics, and I'm really interested in and you're gonna know much more than I about this, but how are other school districts, and how did the task force look at the level of infection in the county or level of infection in the state, how that factors into, we keep saying risk, so I'll just keep saying risk, but the risk assessment of sort of a hybrid or in-school model, and how are other districts or how did the task force think about, when risk is lower, how to maybe pivot or transition to a different model, or when there's a certain level that you transition out of the sort of stage that you're in now, and again, thinking through, like, if we develop a hybrid model, what are some best practices or thoughts around how a district does that sort of adaptive management I sort of talked about at the beginning?
Sure. And, at various times during our task force meeting, we use the sources. There's a Harvard resource and other resources that we were looking at. Various times the county was different colors. I think it was, last time I looked, it was green, as well as Sullivan County in an area of the state. So again, for us, it was management of logistics. So because we were so low in infection rate, we were comfortable having kids in our schools. And so we developed a way that we could dependably and consistently deliver about 25% of our kids. And that's based on the whole logistical component, not just the measure. And so, and then, if we did get a significant increase, people, we talked about the Loudon impact, right? 18,000 people at Loudon. We've had 4th of July. We wondered what would happen. Hampshire was 4th of July, Loudon, as well as Labor Day weekend, coming. But we felt that logistically we could support in green, absolutely bring people in and can support it for the logistics. If we went certainly to red, we would work with the board about removing to no, we can't support, there's too much risk, and we'd move Harold Martin to remote and to move and reduce the support for students in full remote. So we would monitor the number of positive infections and look to move. And if we were at a hybrid, then maybe we could move to the remote plan that we talked about, and then to a full remote plan. So we'd have another stage. But we were looking at, and we did get, if we had a number of infections within our schools, there is a time where even a hybrid would break, or even our support would break, because we wouldn't have the number of staff to be able to support the people in school. We'd have to move to a hybrid for a while until things stabilized again. But we did look, and we used we did look at the colors in in the green versus orange versus yellow, Jim, and we felt very comfortable where we were, that we could support logistically, but understand that the infection rate could support moving from 25% to maybe 50%, and see how we handle that rate of people in our schools.
Thank you. That's helpful. Andrew, I think you're muted if you were trying to talk to us.
Nope, I just said, all right, where are we? I was looking at our list of many questions. Well, I guess one that springs top of mind, I was looking at kind of what we're, actually, I do have a question. This is for, uh-oh, I lost her. We lost Rebecca. Or, oh, she's back.
She's coming.
Perfect. I had a couple of high school specific questions. So if anyone else has a non-high school specific question to ask before me, go for it.
No, Rebecca's got her hand up.
There she is.
I'm so sorry.
You all right? Your hand
Yeah,
is up.
my Surface was not wanting to keep its charge. Sorry, I had to switch devices.
Well, perfect. Well, I actually had a couple of questions for you specifically. We had a bunch of questions come in that are really high school focused. And so I just want to pick through those really quick. I know that a lot of parents who have kids in the juniors and seniors are really worried about the impact on if their children are choosing to go on to college, the impact on college applications, and counseling around that. And I just didn't know if you had any updates or information there as far as what parents and caregivers can expect.
Yes, I have one of those juniors myself. So we've actually had a lot of conversations with Jeff Daly, our new school counseling director. And he's met with his department a few times over the summer to kind of look at that from different angles. We did ask a question on our survey, just trying to gauge parents' comfort level with could we conduct in-person meetings and kind of what they would look like. I know that they've been going through very carefully already, all of the students, making sure they've got the right classes and they're on the right track. We're in the process of switching over from Naviance to another program called SCORE. Each of those programs help us as like a warehouse and a tracking system for kiddos throughout their college or career process. So it starts in their junior year when they take a careers class, and they kind of get logins, and then it progresses and follows them and haunts them by the end of their senior year, because it tracks kind of the colleges that they're interested in, their application process, scholarship opportunities, things like that. So it's a strong communication tool that we have available for both students and families to be able to kind of track that whole process. So I know that they've already done their ordering of PPE. for the department to ensure that they can still have meetings. They do have pretty small offices, so we've looked at some alternative spaces that they can use, even for one-on-one meetings, to kind of give a little more social distance to the meeting. So we've been trying to find some other private places where that are comfortable, that they can have those meetings, and they'll continue to reach out to families and to students individually to just continue those conversations.
Great. And then I didn't know if you knew if the CRTC would be up and running, or if they're remote, or that was just another very specific
my
question.
junior is one of those students too. And so when we had our meeting last Thursday, Concord simultaneously was having their meeting as well. Their vote that happened after midnight landed them all in remote learning. So we have been in contact with Steve Rothenberg. He's the director of the Concord Regional Technology Center. We know we've got about 20 kids in our junior class and another 12 kids in our senior class. So a significant numbers of kids who are interested in participating in CRTC. Steve Rothenberg, if anybody can pull it off, he'll be the one to do it. As I said earlier, we've had a lot of phone calls with him leading up to it to try to talk about how do we coordinate 9 sending schools and how does Concord be as flexible as possible. So even though they did say everybody's going remote, I guess the door was maybe a little bit left open for preschool to revisit the conversation and for CRTC to revisit the conversation. So we've already reached out to Steve Rothenberg. We've said we will be active partners at that table to do what we can to help advocate or be flexible, to kind of, as we were working on schedules, we were trying to design it around CRTC, and recognizing we might not have buses available. CRTC was at a place where they were going to allow some of our students to drive. So we were kind of coordinating on that. So it's definitely been something we've kept strong on our horizon. And as we hear what Concord is able to do, we'll continue to figure out what we can do.
High school specific question
regarding please.
Yeah. And just regarding like AP classes, so especially classes that require labs, hybrid or remote, how would that be addressed?
Yeah, so AP classes, a couple different things. We've already started, Beth Stern is our school counselor that's kind of oversees the AP portion as well. She's done a phenomenal job attending the workshops, getting us registered. So all of our classes in AP get registered with the teacher and the students. And AP, the College Board has opened up a phenomenal program of online resources to support the AP classes during remote instruction. So they actually have a full classroom that replicates what we're doing in our class with our teacher. They've got additional resources and supports available that AP has designed themselves to help support what we're doing. So it is not ideal. It is not what any of us want or hope for, but we are feeling a little more comfortable that there's some solid resources available to help augment what we're doing. And we'll do our very best.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Rob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so my question goes back to health and safety, and this came in on one of the emails. And so moving through the levels, you know, whether we're green or yellow or red, is sort of a retroactive approach by following cases in the community. So this person poses a good question about, could we be more proactive by having COVID testing available to faculty, you know, certainly at the outset of school or perhaps on a weekly basis? Are there any districts that are using that as part of their model, maybe to allay some concerns amongst the teaching faculty that are most at risk if they were to be infected?
In the calls, Rob, that I've been on, that has not been the direction to test students or faculty entering before the public school year. And I've been on most of the calls, but I have not received that guidance that is an expectation or something that we can avail ourselves from. And I certainly can ask that question at tomorrow's call, but I've not received that guidance that it is a good use of the testing proactively to test before they come in district.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I was actually I apologize. I was looking actually through the list of questions to see what we haven't covered. I know Andrew's doing the same.
Have we gone over, and I'm sorry if I missed it, just protocols for, you know, if a child comes in and they have a fever, you know, and I mean like halfway through the day, they have a fever or they have a cough or their stomach hurts. Either what the protocols will be for isolating those kids at all 3 schools, and if we have any protocols or have thought through any protocols as far as notifying who we would notify. Would it be the bus? Would it be their cohort? Would it be everybody?
Sure, and if the building, so we are developing larger isolation spaces, whether we're converting classrooms or adding some space. The protocol is, and again, our nurses will lead this work, but we isolate, call. The hope is to actually get them out of the, you know, support them from school the quickest way without actually going through the entire school. And then checking in about how long the systems last, and if they believe that there should be a COVID test, depending how long, you know, if it's a fever of a high fever, it would probably require one, but if it was stomach or a cough, it does require, if the symptoms go away within, I think, or stay away for 48 hours, I think they can work with the nurses to come back. But if the symptoms don't, or they, you know, become much more aligned, then we would require you know, a COVID test to see where we're at and adjust. The communication, again, that's a work with DHHS on how far and how expansive we believe we need to communicate regarding our ability to cohort and their integration. Like, and I think Andrew bring a good point. If they ride the bus every day, you know, as Rob said, assigned seats, we know it's on the bus. Would that be a notification circle of what we want to do? And we would work with DHHS to make sure we're communicating appropriately.
Steve, how hard would it be? Is it difficulty to be able to kind of the privacy of the student? Has the team talked about a good way of kind of preventing the identity of a student being out there? It's very hard. You know, people talk on, you know, social media, and, you know, my biggest concern is to protect the integrity of our students and especially our faculty too. Have you guys talked about a plan on the privacy part?
You know, just to be completely cognizant of that concern, and we also care about the, you know, we certainly have the health of the people that perhaps were sitting next to that person for, you know, extended length of time. So it is that balance on how we make sure we notice for the health of those in surrounding cohort, of the surrounding areas, as well as the privacy and support, and really rely on our nurses to lead that discussion and communication with DHHS. In the spring, our nurses were the point people, and we had to, you know, address all the nuances of vacation and space and time and symptoms and how we were doing it. So, and they have been great about, you know, as Bill talked about the summer work, our nurses have been great about attending all and becoming educated about what we need to safely run the medical component of our schools. I really appreciate their contribution on the task force and all that they're doing.
This is a question about, I think it goes to Bill, but it's also came in for parents that opt to have their child stay home and be taught. And the question is about how, if they make that decision and then they decide, oh, that was a bad decision, is there a time frame that they're committed to? So Kearsarge has a 45-day time frame. If you're going to go remote, you're in it for 45 days. If you're going to come back, you're in it for 45 days. Have we thought about that transition and what we would do? And that might be pertinent at the other buildings as well, depending upon what the plan looks like when we're done.
And I'll just briefly intro it, then and turn it over to the schools. It depends on Rob on the model. You know, one of the issues is if the board wanted to pursue a 75% and 25%, right, or increase that. What the concern about the transfer from remote to in-person is, do we have the capacity within the classroom, right? Do we go to the, you know, is it 10, as Amy said, 10, all of a sudden now do we have 12? And as long as we have the balance, then we certainly support people making those changes. And in our model, I think if we're talking about the 50% model, where we're at, I think we can support, some fluctuation because we can go back and, with a green day or the A day or the B day. And that's our hope. These are significant decisions. I've had that email to a few times today. When can we transition? Because we're not looking at a 17, like some schools are remote everywhere. So you might have 17 kids in your class learning on a laptop with 5 kids at home. Well, those 5 kids or 5 new kids come in, you really can't do 22 in that classroom. So that's the limit. And that's why at 45 days, we can reshuffle. I think that's the note. They reshuffle to make sure they have the balance. And I don't know if any of the buildings want to address it, but our hope is to accommodate. And with a 50% model, we think we have the capacity to balance them well.
Steve, I can jump in and say that we're basing our 50% model off of our class rosters right now. So all of the kids right now in our minds are registered in the classes. Whether they choose to go remote or come to school, we'll split our classes based on the 50% of each class. So there will be room for them to flex back in if they want to. And if people want to flex out, they can do that too.
And Rob, what's an interesting dynamic with some districts who are, should I say, second home vacation land world is the growth. I think one school up north almost doubled their kindergarten, Rob, because of, and Sunapee, I went to college with the superintendent in Sunapee. They've had significant growth, people registering in their, in their community. And that's what they're concerned about. Wow, we didn't plan on having another 22, and Sunapee's pretty tiny. They didn't plan on 22, summer homes now becoming year round. And that has been that kind of expansion of enrollment. And some are actually saying, you have to wait 45 days before you can come in because of that balance. And that's a new phenomenon. I mean, we've had a lot of kids, but it's not because of, I don't know how many second homes there are in Hop where people list as vacation destination, but it's a pretty nice place.
So
I'm in my first home and only home.
So I've read other, we've been sent a number of back to school plans, and Steve, I assume that you and your team have read many more than I have. And I guess, I mean, we're talking about 50% numbers and 25% numbers. And I guess I just want to go to the other extreme, and I'm curious. So some of the districts that have been talked about going 100%, full in back to school. I'm just sort of curious because I guess I don't know. Can they do that because they have the facilities to manage sort of the space and the social distancing requirements? Or two, are they not adhering to the social distance requirements, that the CDC or the state has sort of recommended? I'm just sort of curious how those other districts are balancing that. And if we don't know, that's also fine. I know you read things and you talk to a lot of your peers.
Sure.
I'm just curious if you know an answer to that.
To be completely frank, Jim, some are going to the 3-foot side of the 3 to 6 foot range, and that's increasing their class size. Some have smaller class sizes, so if they go 3 feet, they can hit most. And if they have the 15% reduction to remote, they think they can hit it. Some districts said, this is what we are doing. And if this isn't something you're going to do, they're not offering any remote option. They are doing either VLAX or homeschool. So they're just focusing on their small, what they have to offer. And to be also, the school hasn't started yet. So who knows, I don't know if that is their first plan. But yeah, and some, you're right, some have more space or more, they can spread out. They can spread out more with that piece, and have, some schools had at one point had 800 kids in them. Now they're at 600. If we were, and Amy and I talked about Amy's, I think is Maple's just about as big as it's been. I think you have, right, one less than the full cohort of classrooms, or pretty close to that. So we're big. I mean, we're adding 4 classrooms because Harold has no space. The high school, so we don't have a lot of breathing room, a lot of excess space as overflow to handle that, that 3 feet. And some of this is, and there's no judgment in my mind, 6 feet may become 3 feet will become 0 pretty quick, and just trying to err on that side. But certainly if the board wants us to look at moving larger, we will absolutely do that. But I think we measured and we can fit our guidelines with masks, with the feet. We're pretty confident that we can do it logistically, how we're going to support it, but we're ready to attack it and keep developing those logistics.
Yeah, thank you. No, and that I wasn't implying it. I was just curious, to sort of hear from you how there's so many different scenarios out there. Every school district sort of approaching this in somewhat different and unique ways, and that was just a curiosity question. But thank you, your answer helped.
And I asked our bus contract to set up the appointment for tomorrow. I asked our bus contract manager, what are people doing? Buses. He goes, Steve, a lot are doing Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, Wednesday. But one district is doing, believe it or not, half day in the morning for anybody who wants to be in person. Buses run at noon, and then half day in the afternoon for anybody who's remote. I just thought it was interesting. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting approach. But so you're right. And some districts are full remote, and some districts are trying to go, I won't say 100% with 15, 20% that they believe aren't going to choose the in-person option because they're just not comfortable.
So we're running up to 8 o'clock. It's been 2.5 hours. I admire all your stamina. So thank you. And I guess for the, I just want to, I want to admit, we received questions that we haven't asked, both in email and on the chat. And some of them I think are due because, some of them require like the decision on a plan before it's easy to figure out an answer to it, or have an answer to it. But I'm looking for the board members, if there's any other questions or additional questions you all want to raise and ask at this point. And I'm not saying that we have to stop. So that wasn't like a time, but I did want to do a time check, and also just, see where we're at currently.
I have one question for Steve in terms of our ability to make a decision as a board. It seems to me, Steve, through this discussion, there's some information we need to have, and registration for who wants to be on a bus, registration for who wants to be in school, that those things need to be known quantities before we can sort all of this out. Is that kind of a registration process feasible in a short amount of time so that we know all of the data before we make a decision about what we can deliver as a school district?
And our building administration really would like that information, and they talked about sending something out and following up with phone calls to do the best we can. And I can do an all-call notice to families saying, please check your email in the next 48 hours to fill out to give us the information that we need. So I think it is available soon. What is a reasonable amount for families and where they are with an all-call, we get there because not everybody checks their email, but happy to do that. The board can also just charge us to, plan, continue your plan. We planned a first proposal, and I fully expected the plan that I presented to get better once it was presented to the board with the leadership team and the community. So now we can charge the leadership team to continue to develop this type of, a hybrid model. And actually that already started. It's been done, but now it's just more formalizing it and getting some data. And we certainly want to make sure we're communicating with our faculty and staff and finding out, we've got significant data, but where are we in that piece, and how do we adjust for the approved, very appropriate, very deeply personal individual health concerns, and how we adapt to that. So Rob, I would add that too, but yeah, we need data to keep going.
Steve, I want to make sure, I'm a little starstruck with the 35,000 that we've already spent, and it's quite a bit of money from the CARES Act and what we've put aside. I really want us to dig deep into the cost of, this cleaning the buses. That's something I'm very curious about. And also, if it's relevant, my thought process is the cost per pupil and per teacher or anyone to protect in our school district. I know maybe a minimal, but for me, we got to look at it as a daily expense. If a kid drops the mask, I don't want them to use that mask again. I want everyone to be safe. I'm sure that people will be providing their own masks coming here, but I need to know that we won't come to like October, November and run out of PPE. So I just want to have that warm, fuzzy feeling that we've looked at the cost analysis of going back to these alternative solution scenarios for our students and for our staff, just so we make sure we know what we're talking about.
Sure. Just make sure I get that. You'd like to know a rough estimate of per PPE per day or PPE per week or some way to keep us going and make sure we have enough resources to get through whatever length of time. And the other piece you'd like to know is what is the cost of either a daily or weekly or biweekly or monthly disinfectant of the school buses.
Correct, sir.
Yep. And I'm meeting with our bus contract manager tomorrow at 3 o'clock to have that discussion and also some flexibility discussions and route developments once we get more information. It was kind of an all-encompassing discussion with our bus contract manager tomorrow at 3.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Just to kind of go off of that and reiterate it, because we've, as we've said, looked at a lot of different options. And I mean, the fact remains is we don't have a budget this year yet. And some schools that are bigger or have more money are going to be able to do more. They're going to be able to put in more plexiglass or offer different things that we don't have a money tree. We got 46,000 from CARES. We set aside 40,000 from the undesignated fund balance. So I do think that it's really important for us to recognize that at going back to the finite resources, there are finite financial resources. And as of Thursday, we actually won't know what our budget is. So we're also going to have to, if we're going to be able to make a decision, and this is sort of not necessarily just for folks on this panel, but for everyone, we're going to have to go off of more than a hope and a prayer. We're going to have to go off of a budget where we actually have the money to safely send students back into the classrooms. So I think keeping the financial aspect top of mind is we can't ignore it.
No, Andrew, I couldn't agree with you more. It's something that I worry about is, how, with our budget, mostly being personnel costs, how do these other costs, if our busing contract needs to increase, like where do we find that and where's the flexibility? So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And I will say, we're sort of skipping ahead to sort of our next steps as a board, which is Thursday. And what we do know is we still won't have a budget determined on Thursday. That won't happen this Saturday. We still will not have all the data. No matter what we do, we're not going to have all the data in place. And I do think that Steve and his team needs direction. And so I hope that when we start this conversation on Thursday, we can start as board members, reflecting on, I'm sure we all will reflect on what we heard tonight and sort of the planning that's gone on, but reflect on what our goals are, what our individual as board members and as sort of, the individuals who serve on the governing board of the district, what our risk tolerance is. Because I guarantee we probably as individuals and sort of as elected officials probably have different levels of risk tolerance. And so I do think I'm just thinking about, what is maybe some leading questions I might ask at the beginning of the meeting around, where we are on risk tolerance, where we feel, a goal for the Hopkinton School District should be in terms of, where we are with metrics and where we might want to get to. And so we're not going to have all the data to support some of the conclusions or some of the opinions that we might have, but I do think starting with a shared understanding of where we're all coming in to this conversation from I think will be helpful to guide that next sort of decision on what we want to charge our leadership team to start to put together, to put all those details that we have a lot of questions about. But I do think from our standpoint, from the board, that guidance is going to be really important to begin drafting. And we might find, that as a board, we want to get to a certain point. And as the leadership team does their work, it's either there's a cost associated or there's a logistic issue associated with it and we can't reach it, or there's hurdles that then again as a board we have to uncover. But I do think it's going to be important for us to clear that hump and provide that guidance and direction. And this will be adaptive management at its best. And I hope that the community understands that that we're going to learn more as we continue to go down the road, and we're going to have to continue to adjust and manage. And so just like a proposal was made on Thursday, that sounds like it's being adjusted based upon conversations. My assumption is that even if the board wholeheartedly supported a certain place, that is probably going to have to be managed over time for how we achieve it and keep that safety that we want to see in our students and staff. So are there, I guess I don't want to say last call, but are there other, right now for the board to have that conversation on Thursday? I just want to make sure that you've gotten everything that you feel you need to out of these questions and answers to move us to that next stage on Thursday, knowing that we're going to receive information between now and then from Steve, from his conversations with the bus. And then I'm sure that we're going to receive, and I hope we receive, additional comments and suggestions from the community reflecting on what we all learned tonight, and some additional ideas. So anyway, I'll stop. Are there any additional questions that we want to bring forward now, or any other thoughts that board members have that they want to sort of close out with?
I guess the one other question that I have, and I don't know if it's necessarily for the panel, but one thing that I'm going to be thinking about and looking towards on Thursday will be specific metrics. I know we've talked a lot about, using DHHS as post, but I think it would help both the board and our community to have specific metrics that we can look at and specific points that we can really, when we meet X, we either, drop to remote, or we can kind of go to the next level. I personally feel that the more specificity we can have, the better. While at the same time, giving Steve his ish, allowing a little bit of that wiggle room in there, but really having a shared understanding of what we're all working towards or off of. So that's just another piece that I'll be thinking about.
No, and some people sent me some plans with, I think, some more examples in the last couple of days. I've got a few emails too. So happy to, create some review with some of our nurses and also with the leadership team, and have that added to the bus stuff and some costing stuff. Because I agree with you, and I think that's fair to everybody. And I appreciate the resources that people have provided to that I can at least review and work with. So thank you. Happy to bring that on Thursday as well.
I guess the only other thing that I was trying to wrap my head around a while ago was not to go to the extreme, but how do we handle some people not understand that this is a public health crisis? Has the leadership team kind of established, I don't think Bill's going to suspend my child for not, for accidentally taking her mask off, but potentially, I've seen a lot of people not believe in this, and unfortunately, I have to respect that, understand that. There might be students who want to attend Hopkinton and not wear a mask. And how can we establish, is that policy from the policy committee, from you, Steve? How do we establish, a one and done, or what's the level of tiers that your leadership team potentially talked about if we decide to say, you know what, we're going into hybrid maybe? How can we send a message to these students saying, hey, these are the rules of engagement when you come to our schools?
No, I think it's all of that. I think for this to work, we're going to need support from our families, even though some families, may have different views, but to function in the schools, in that close environment, in protecting our teachers, we're going to need help from the families. We're going to need support. The policy committee is posted. We have a 9:00 meeting on Thursday. We do have some draft policies from our attorney to take a look at mask policies. And so we're going to take a look at that on Thursday. Because you're right, it's an interesting time, Mr. Gopal, about adherence. Even in, Rob and I talked about just driving in on a Sunday in this community, and you see a variety of commitments to masks, different than when I went in other states or other areas. But we get that. But I truly, Hopkins is an extraordinary place. I think if we can emphasize safety and try and do as much as we can in person as possible, especially at the beginning of the year. I have great faith that we'll get tremendous support in trying to make sure we can have as much in person as we can, develop those relationships that everybody's talked to about tonight. And that if we do have to, because of the metrics Andrea's speaking to, have to change that, at least we have foundation of time together to develop those relationships and that care, so we can cash those in as we go and maybe a different model. And this community in my 21 years, now beginning my 22nd, has been incredible about working together, caring about each other, and doing what is right for kids and right for each other. So I have great expectations that whatever this board decides, this community will support the best we can. And I just really believe in it. Hopkins is an extraordinary place.
Thank you, Steve.
So with that, I was watching Andrea's body language. I thought you were going to take yourself off mute. So with that, I want to thank Steve, you and your leadership team, and all the members of the task force who've put a lot of time, thought, energy, commitment into working on this issue. This is a work in progress. So I also want to thank my colleagues, my peers on the board, for really, I think, helping work through and making the most out of this Q&A session, and really diving deep and helping me understand, a lot of the challenges and moving parts that we have here, and helping us to make some informed decisions on Thursday. And to the community, I just want to, say thank you, both for sitting with us for the last, 2.5 hours, and digging in with us, and for, sincerely, for all your comments and questions and suggestions. I think from my time, both on the select board and the school board, this is probably one of the largest outpourings of communication that I've received. And it's been overly, not 100%, but I would say for the most part, it's been very respectful. It's been very curious. I think that a lot of the questions have been curious in nature and really wanting to understand. And so I thank you for that. And I hope you all join us on Thursday, because I do think the board will I'm sure the board is going to spend a lot of time deliberating over what we heard today, bringing our own thoughts and opinions into the conversation, and making some really challenging and hard decisions. Maybe for me, it's probably one of the hard. I think this is one of the hardest decisions I've had to make. This is really complex. This impacts 1,000 students and their families and their extended families. So this is a very pivotal, challenging decision. And so I just want to thank you all for how you've helped us learn and grow and be ready to make that decision when we have to. So with that, if there's no objection, I'm going to adjourn our meeting and just encourage people to stay in touch either individually with us as board members, or use the contact information to stay in touch. And we really do appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, guys.